The rain that fell on Chicago wasn't water. It was a thin, yellow-tinged film that left slick, greasy streaks on the window of my cubicle. Outside, the few sad-looking trees lining the street looked a little more wilted than they had yesterday. The news called it a localized atmospheric pollutant event. I knew better. I woke up from the dream an hour ago. My heart wasn't pounding. My skin wasn't slick with sweat. I just opened my eyes in the dark of my apartment, and the images were there, burned onto the back of my eyelids. A world of red fog. Things with human shapes but no humanity, shambling through shattered cities. The sun a merciless, white-hot coin in the sky. Then, a winter so cold it cracked the very stone of the buildings. It wasn't a nightmare, it was a preview. The other thing that was there when I woke up was the space. It wasn't a thought, or a vision. It was a place. I could feel it, tethered to my consciousness. I closed my eyes and I was standing under a warm, gentle sun, on a plot of rich, dark earth that stretched out for what felt like a couple of acres. A small, clear stream cut through the middle of it, sparkling. I felt an instinctual thirst. I knelt in my mind, cupped the water, and drank. Back in my physical body, a jolt went through me. Not electricity. It was cleaner. It was a wave of pure vitality that washed away the chronic fatigue of my office job, the dull ache in my back, the faint, persistent headache from staring at a screen for 10 hours a day. My mind was sharp, clear. For the first time in years, I felt truly awake. Now, sitting in my cubicle, the hum of the servers and the distant rattle of the L train were the sounds of a world on a countdown timer. "Leo, you got those quarterly reports collated?" Tom's voice cut through the air. He wasn't at my desk. He never came to my desk. He shouted from his glass-walled office, a king on a cheap office furniture throne. I didn't answer. I just minimized the spreadsheet on my monitor. I opened a blank Word document. Typed, resignation, at the top. A shadow fell over my desk. Jessica. She stood there, one hand on her hip, a disappointed frown on her face that had become her default expression when looking at me. She was holding a coffee cup, the expensive kind from the cafe downstairs. A gift, I knew, for Tom. "Leo, Tom's calling you. Are you even listening?" Her voice was a sharp whisper. An accusation. "I'm busy," I said, my fingers moving on the keyboard. "Busy doing what? Staring into space again?" She leaned closer, her perfume, a scent I used to love, now just smelled like chemicals. She glanced at my screen. Her eyes widened slightly. "What are you doing? Are you crazy?" I finished typing my name at the bottom of the letter and hit print. The printer at the communal station whirred to life. I stood up, my chair scraping against the plastic mat. The whole open plan office seemed to go quiet. People didn't stand up to Tom. I walked to the printer, pulled the warm sheet of paper from the tray, and turned towards his glass box. Jessica followed me, her heels clicking nervously on the linoleum. "Leo, don't. You need this job. We need this job," she hissed. I didn't look at her. I pushed open the door to Tom's office without knocking. He looked up from his computer, his face a mask of irritation that quickly morphed into a smug, questioning smirk. He leaned back in his leather chair, the cheap material groaning in protest. "Well, look what we have here. Finally decided to grace me with your presence, Leo," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Where are the reports?" I placed the paper on his desk, right on top of his keyboard. "I quit." The smirk vanished. He stared at the paper, then up at me, his eyes narrowing. Jessica scurried in behind me, looking horrified. "You quit?" Tom let out a short, barking laugh. "You're quitting? Leo, let's be realistic. Where are you going to go? No one else is going to put up with your lack of ambition. You've got a good, stable thing here. I don't need it anymore," I said. My voice was level, flat. It felt like someone else was speaking. The old Leo would have been stammering, sweating. This new version of me felt nothing. Tom's eyes flickered to Jessica, who was standing by the door, wringing her hands. He saw his opening. "Ah, I see," he said, tapping a finger on his desk. "Running away from your responsibilities. Typical. It's a shame, Jessica. I thought you could have motivated him, but some people are just dead weight." Jessica nodded, a quick, jerky motion. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I tried, Tom, but, well, you know. Ambition is important. I always say, being too content is a sin in itself." The words hung in the air. Dead weight. A sin. I looked from her face, a mask of strained sympathy for her boss, to Tom's, full of triumphant disdain. I saw the whole picture. The late nights she said she was working. The new jewelry she said she bought on sale. It all clicked into place with the same clarity I felt when I drank from the stream. A small smile touched my lips. It wasn't a happy one. "You'll regret this," I said. Not as a threat, as a statement of fact. Tom scoffed. "Is that the best you've got? A line from a bad movie? Get out of my office. You're fired." "Saves me the paperwork. I already quit," I corrected him. I turned and walked out. The whispers from the surrounding cubicles were a low hiss. I walked back to my desk, ignoring them. I didn't pack up my personal effects. The stupid mug, the wilted succulent, the picture of me and Jessica from a year ago. None of it mattered. I walked out of the building and didn't look back. The yellow sunlight felt strange on my skin. The world was still moving. Cars were honking. People were rushing past, heads down, buried in their phones. They were all sleepwalking. My first stop was the bank. I walked up to the teller, my face a blank mask. "I'd like to withdraw the entire balance of my savings account. In cash." The teller, a young woman with tired eyes, looked at my balance on her screen. A flicker of surprise. $30,000? "Yes, sir, we may not have that much cash on hand." "Check," I said. She made a call. She typed on her keyboard. 10 minutes later, I walked out with a thick, heavy envelope in a bank bag. The weight of it was real. It was the start. I went back to my apartment. The building was old, the hallway smelled of dust and boiled cabbage. My apartment was small, a living room, a bedroom, a tiny kitchen. The last 5 years of my life were contained in these cheap, beige walls. I didn't waste time. I sat at my small dining table, took out a legal pad and a pen. I started the list. Rice, 500 lbs. Beans, pinto, black, kidney, 500 lbs. Canned goods, meats, vegetables, fruits. As much as I can get. Water, purification tablets, life straws, large-scale filters. Seeds, non-GMO, heirloom. Every variety imaginable. Corn, squash, potatoes, tomatoes, wheat, herbs. Tools, shovels, axes, saws, hammers, a full mechanic's tool set. Medical, antibiotics, painkillers, bandages, trauma kits, sutures, iodine. Fuel, gasoline, diesel, propane. Stabilizer for the fuel. Power, solar panels, deep cycle batteries, inverter, copper wiring. Defense, crossbows, bolts, knives, body armor. The list went on, page after page. Every item I wrote down, I could picture it. Stored, safe, in the dark, rich earth of my space. Time was suspended. Nothing would spoil, nothing would rot. Late in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. "I can't do this anymore, Leo. We want different things. Tom offered me a promotion, a shot at management. I need to focus on my career. I'll have a friend drop your stuff off tomorrow. I think this is for the best." I deleted the message without replying. A friend. She wouldn't even face me herself. It didn't hurt. It was just data. Information confirming what I already knew. She had made her choice. The sun began to set, casting long shadows into the room. I spent the remainder of my day on my first project. The door. My apartment door was a hollow core piece of junk. I had spent $2,000 of the $30,000 on what I picked up from a specialty security store an hour ago. A solid steel, fire-rated door and frame. 3 separate high-security deadbolts. I worked with a focus I hadn't felt in years. I pried the old frame out with a crowbar. The wood splintered. The noise was loud, but no one came to check. In this building, people minded their own business. I heaved the new steel frame into place, securing it with long lag bolts that sank deep into the studs. The door itself was heavy. It took all my strength to lift it onto the hinges. By the time I was done, night had fallen. The door was a slab of impenetrable gray steel set into the flimsy drywall. It looked out of place. It looked perfect. I tested the locks. The first deadbolt slid into place with a heavy, satisfying thunk. The second one, a deep clack. The third, a final, definitive click. I leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the door. The vibrations from the city outside were gone. The sounds of the hallway were gone. It was just me. I turned on the small TV in the living room. The news was on. A blandly handsome anchor was talking. And in economic news, global food prices saw a surprise 5% jump this month, with experts citing unexpected droughts and poor harvests in several key agricultural regions. Analysts are advising consumers not to panic, as they expect the market to stabilize. They didn't see. They couldn't see. They were talking about percentages and markets. I was thinking about harvests and survival. I looked at the thick envelope of cash on the table. I looked at the long, detailed list next to it. My old life was over. It ended today, in a soulless office, under fluorescent lights. My new life was just beginning. The sweep starts tomorrow. The heat was the first sign. Not the news, not the strange yellow film on the windows, but the heat. It settled over the city like a wet, wool blanket for 3 days. The air conditioners in the old apartment building groaned, fighting a losing war. The asphalt outside softened, people moved slower, their faces slick with sweat. In the evenings, the news talked about record highs and heatstroke warnings. It was just weather. My body did not feel the heat in the same way. I drank the water from the stream in my mind, the cool, clean liquid that tasted of stone and life, and the oppressive warmth became a distant fact. My skin remained cool, my muscles moved without the leaden weight of exhaustion. In the last 3 weeks since I walked out of my old life, my body had changed. The dull ache of a desk-bound existence was gone. I could lift a 50-pound bag of rice with one arm and not feel the strain. I moved with a purpose that felt alien and correct. The work was constant. My apartment was no longer a home. It was a logistics hub, a way station. Every day, a new delivery. I signed for pallets left on the curb. I met drivers in back alleys. I learned the schedules of an industrial bakery supplier, a restaurant depot, a medical surplus warehouse. I used all $30,000 from my savings. Then I took the loans. Small amounts from a dozen different high-interest loan apps on my phone. $200,000 in digital credit, turned into hard assets. The debt was meaningless. It was a number on a server that would soon be without power. I worked mostly at night, under the single bare bulb in my living room. The hallway outside my steel door smelled of other people's lives, fried onions, stale cigarettes, cheap air freshener. They heard the sounds, the scrape of dollies, the thud of boxes, the squeal of packing tape. Mrs. Gable from 3B knocked once. "Leo, dear, is everything all right? It sounds like you're moving a mountain in there." Her voice was a thin, worried thing through the metal. "Just some rearranging, Mrs. Gable. Doing a deep clean." She didn't believe me. No one did. I saw them in the hallway, their quick, sideways glances. They whispered, "The crazy prepper in 4C. Thinks the bombs are coming." The goods piled up in my living room, a mountain of cardboard and plastic. 10 tons of rice. 5 tons of flour. Crates of canned meat that smelled of tin and preservatives. Stacks of water filters, iodine tablets, antibiotics, painkillers, trauma kits. I bought seeds from every online heirloom catalog I could find. Corn, beans, squash, wheat, potatoes, kale. Seeds that could withstand drought. Seeds that could withstand flooding. Their paper packets felt light, impossibly small for the life they held. The true destination was the space. I would close the door, engage the 3 deadbolts. A heavy thunk, a deep clack, a final click. The sounds of the building would vanish. I would touch a box, a case of MREs, a drum of gasoline, a solar generator still in its packaging, and I would push. Not with my hands, but with my mind. The box would not slide into a shimmering portal. It would simply cease to be there. In the next instant, I could feel it, settled and safe on the dark earth under the gentle sun of my private world. The living room would be a little emptier. I would grab the next box. The work was mindless, physical, and satisfying. The pile in my apartment never grew too large, just enough to look like the clutter of a hoarder to any prying eyes. But the space was full. A vast, silent warehouse under an open sky, where food for 100 people for a decade lay waiting, untouched by time. I installed the cameras one afternoon. Tiny, wireless things. One in the peephole of my door, looking out into the hall. One stuck to the ceiling corner of the hallway itself, powered by a battery pack I would swap out every few days. One outside my window, looking down at the street. I watched the feed on my phone. The world became a series of silent, rainy video streams. Mrs. Gable walking her small dog. The mailman, a group of teenagers loitering by the entrance. Information. She came on a Tuesday, 25 days before the red fog. I heard the sharp, impatient knock on the steel door. I knew it was her before I looked at the camera feed on my phone. The tiny lens showed Jessica, one hand on her hip, tapping her foot. She was wearing a new dress, a shade of blue that Tom liked. I opened the door. The 3 locks sounded loud in the quiet hall. She didn't step inside. She wrinkled her nose at the sight behind me. A few stacks of canned goods, a half-dozen large water jugs, a tarp covering a lumpy pile of something. "My God, Leo," she said. Her voice was flat. "It's worse than I thought. What is all this junk? Are you depressed?" I didn't answer. I just stood in the doorway, blocking her path. "I came to get the last of my things," she said, gesturing to a small cardboard box by the door I had packed for her. Her makeup, a few books, the silver necklace I'd given her for her last birthday. "And to talk. There's nothing to talk about." My own voice sounded foreign to me. A low, steady machine. "Yes, there is." She looked past me, into the dim room, her expression a mix of pity and disgust. "You need help. Quitting your job, holing up in here with all this garbage. This isn't you. This is some kind of breakdown." "I'm fine," I said. She let out a frustrated sigh. "You're not fine. You're throwing your life away. Tom, he gave me the promotion. I'm an assistant manager now. He's taking me to look at a new condo this weekend. He's buying me a car." She paused, waiting for a reaction. A flicker of jealousy, a shout, anything. I gave her nothing. I just watched her face. Her lips were pressed into a thin line. Her eyes, which I once thought I knew, were cold. "He's giving me a real life, Leo. A future. Not this." She waved a hand at my apartment, at me. "This backwoods paranoia. I feel sorry for you. I really do." She picked up her box. "My friend was supposed to get this, but I wanted to see for myself. I see I made the right choice." She turned to leave. At the top of the stairs, she stopped and looked back. "Don't call me," she said. "Don't try to text. We're done. Just try not to regret everything." I watched her walk down the stairs, her heels clicking on the worn concrete. The sound faded. I closed the door. Thunk, clack, click. The world was gone again. The room was hot and smelled of dust and cardboard. Her perfume still hung in the air, a chemical sweetness that didn't belong. I stood there for a full minute. I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness. It was like watching a scene from a movie I had no interest in. It was just an event that had occurred. Then I closed my eyes. I was standing on the rich soil. The air was warm and clean. The stream gurgled nearby. A few feet away stood a small tree I had planted from a simple seed. It was already 10 feet tall, its branches heavy with fruit. Peaches. They were flawless, the skin a velvety crimson and gold, glowing with health. They were the size of softballs. I reached out and plucked one. The weight was substantial in my hand. I brought it back with me. I stood in my dingy apartment, holding a perfect, impossible fruit. The contrast was stark, the reality of the world in my head versus the reality of the world outside my door. I walked to the window. Down on the street, Jessica was getting into a sleek black sedan. Tom's car. He leaned over and kissed her before pulling away from the curb. They drove off, toward their future. I took a bite of the peach. The juice exploded in my mouth. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated sweetness, a flavor so intense it was almost electric. It was the taste of sunlight, clean water, and rich earth. I felt the vitality spread through me, a quiet hum of power washing away the last lingering phantom of the woman who had just left. I ate the entire thing, down to the stone. Later, I sat watching the news on my laptop. The volume was low. A scientist with a strained expression was talking on an international panel. "Unprecedented fluctuations in the planet's magnetosphere. We're seeing anomalies that we can't currently explain." The anchor cut him off to go to a commercial for a new soft drink. No one was listening. Night fell. The city lights cast a familiar orange glow against the clouds. Then, a new sound began. It was soft at first. A faint patter against my windowpane. I thought it was rain. But the sound was wrong. It wasn't a gentle tap of water. It was a hiss. A quiet, insistent sizzle. I went to the window and looked at the thick glass. Where the drops hit, they left small, oily streaks, the same yellow as before, but thicker. I looked down at the metal housing of the air conditioner unit below my window. Each drop that landed on the painted steel sent up a tiny, almost invisible wisp of vapor. A sound like bacon frying, very, very faintly. A sharp, acrid smell began to seep in through the window frame. The smell of burnt chemicals, of metal being eaten away. The patter grew louder. The hissing was constant now. The apocalypse did not arrive with a bang or a scream. It arrived with a quiet, corrosive drizzle in the middle of the night. The hissing did not stop. For 2 days the world dissolved under a constant, yellow drizzle. It was not rain. Rain made a drumming sound. This was a sustained, corrosive sizzle, the sound of a billion tiny chemical reactions happening at once. Through the peephole camera, I watched the world outside my steel door melt. The paint on the opposite wall, number 4D, was blistering in patches where the mist seeped in through the hall window. The cheap rubber welcome mat outside Mrs. Gable's door looked sticky, deformed. The air in the hallway, seen through the grainy lens, was hazy with a faint, yellow tint. The smell, even through my sealed door, was sharp. It was the smell of a battery cracked open. Inside, my world was my own. The air was clean, filtered by 2 purifiers I had running constantly. I sat at my small kitchen table, drinking tea. The water was from the stream in my space, heated in a clean kettle on a portable butane stove. It tasted of life. The contrast was a physical thing. I would look at the monitor showing the bubbling paint outside, then look at the clear, amber liquid in my mug. One world was ending, the other was beginning. The utilities failed in sequence, like organs shutting down in a dying body. First, the water. On the morning of the second day, I turned the tap. A gush of brownish-yellow liquid sputtered out, thick with grit. It smelled like bleach and rust. An hour later, it slowed to a trickle, then stopped. A city-wide announcement played on a loop on the few television channels still broadcasting. A bland-faced woman in a neat blazer read from a teleprompter, her voice strained. Technical difficulties with the municipal water treatment facility. We advise all citizens to remain indoors and boil any tap water. Help is on the way. It was a lie. There was no help. Next was the internet. It flickered on and off for hours, like a nerve twitching. I saw fragments of a world tearing itself apart. News sites showed images of riots at grocery stores. A short video clip from another city showed people in hazmat suits spraying down a street while figures lay unmoving on the pavement. Then, my screen went blank. The connection was gone. A small, green light on the router turned a permanent, solid red. The digital world was dead. The last to go was the illusion of order. The TV channels died one by one, replaced by static. Only a single AM radio station remained. It was no longer broadcasting official messages. It was just an open mic of despair. A woman crying, begging for someone to check on her mother in a nursing home. A man shouting about men with guns taking his canned food. Static. A piercing scream, cut short. Static. It was a soundtrack to the end. I turned it off. I went to the living room and stood over a crate of apples I had acquired. They were normal, store-bought apples. I closed my eyes and entered my space. The air here was warm and sweet. The stream murmured. I walked to its bank and knelt, dipping my hands in the cool, living water. I drank from my cupped hands. As the water coursed through me, something shifted. It wasn't a sudden jolt. It was a slow awakening, a warmth spreading from my core, moving through my veins, a humming sensation that felt like green, growing things. I opened my eyes, still in the space. I looked at my hands. Nothing seemed different, but I could feel it. A new connection, an awareness of the life in the soil beneath my feet, of the sap moving in the peach tree nearby. I returned to my apartment, the feeling still humming within me. I picked up an apple from the crate. I took a small knife and pried one of the brown seeds from the core. I placed it on the table. Staring at it, I focused on that new, green warmth inside me. I reached out a hand, not touching it, but willing it. Grow. A tiny, pale thread pushed out from the seed's casing. It was slow at first, then it accelerated. A rootlet, white and fragile, wriggled out, followed by a second. A green shoot, impossibly vibrant, split the seed husk and pushed upward. 1 inch, 2 inches, 2 small, perfect leaves unfurled. It happened over the course of 30 seconds. A miracle of life, sped up, commanded by a thought. The energy drain was minimal, like flexing a muscle I never knew I had. My power, the ability to control life itself. It was weak, but it was real. A loud banging on my door broke the silence. It wasn't a tentative knock. It was the heavy, repeated thud of a fist. Leo, Henderson, open the door. We know you're in there. We need to have a community meeting. It was Mr. Henderson from 2A, the self-appointed building manager and chief busybody. The man who once told me my boxes in the hall were a fire hazard. I walked to the door and looked at the peephole camera feed on my phone. Henderson was there, his face red and sweaty. Behind him were 5 or 6 other tenants. The Gables from 3B. The young couple from 4A. Their faces were a mixture of fear and righteousness. I pressed a button on the small intercom I had wired to the camera. My voice came out of the tiny speaker on the outside, tinny and electronic. "What do you want, Henderson? Don't play games, son," he barked. "We all know you've been hoarding. Food, water, God knows what else. The water is out. People are getting desperate. You have a responsibility to your neighbors." "A responsibility," my electronic voice repeated, flat and dead. "That's right. We're all in this together," a woman behind him added, her voice shrill. "You're a young man. You should be helping. You need to share what you have." I thought of the sideways glances, the whispers, the pity in Jessica's eyes. Crazy prepper. My response was cold and immediate. "When I was breaking my back hauling every one of those boxes up 4 flights of stairs, you all stood in your doorways and laughed at me," the speaker crackled. "You said I was paranoid. Now you want what's mine because you were too stupid to prepare." The answer is no. Henderson's face contorted with rage. "You son of a bitch. This isn't a request. There are children in this building. Old people. Not my problem," my voice buzzed back. "Go away. This is your only warning." To punctuate the statement, I walked into my bathroom. I took a 5-gallon jug of pure, clean water from the space, uncapped it, and poured it directly down the drain of the tub. I held my phone near the gurgling, splashing sound. Through the intercom, the sound of an obscene amount of wasted, life-giving water filled the hallway. On the screen, I saw their faces change from anger to pure, animalistic thirst. A man's jaw dropped. Mrs. Gable's eyes widened in disbelief. They could hear paradise being flushed away, just feet from where they stood. Henderson looked like he wanted to break the door down, but he knew it was solid steel. He just stood there, breathing heavily, defeated by a sound. After a moment of charged silence, he spit on my door. "You'll regret this," he snarled, before turning and leading his pathetic flock away. I watched them go. Then I began my work. The windows were a liability. I had purchased several thick sheets of 1/4-inch steel, cut to size. One by one, I drilled them directly into the window frames, sealing my apartment off from the outside world. The sound of the drill was loud, but there was no one left to complain. With the last plate in place, the room plunged into darkness, lit only by my battery-powered lamps. I was in a vault, a tomb, a sanctuary. I celebrated by taking a bath. I filled the tub with gallons of warm water from the space, adding some bath salts I'd stocked. The steam felt clean on my skin. As I soaked, I watched the camera feeds on a tablet propped on a stool. The street below was chaos. I watched a mob break the glass front of the corner convenience store. They poured out moments later, fighting over single bottles of water and bags of chips. One man clubbed another over the head for a 6-pack of soda. He was then kicked and stomped by 3 others. It was grainy, silent, and distant. Like a nature documentary. I switched the feed. I had hacked into the external security CCTVs of a few dozen buildings in the area before the internet went down, including the high-end condo where Jessica was now living with Tom. The feed was still live on the building's local network, which my long-range receiver could just barely pick up. I found the camera for their floor. The image was clear. They were in the hallway, arguing. Jessica was gesturing wildly, her face pale with panic. Tom grabbed her arm. She tried to pull away. Even without sound, I could see the cracks in their perfect future. It had taken less than 48 hours to appear. I switched the feed again to a public traffic camera near a National Guard armory. An armored truck was parked outside. A female officer in tactical gear stood guard, her helmet on, rifle held at the ready. She had a stern, focused face. Tanya, at least, I thought it was her. A woman I'd seen on the news once, a decorated officer. She was still part of the collapsing order, a small, solid rock in a river of mud. For now, I sank deeper into the warm water, the chaos of the outside world a million miles away. My apartment was utterly silent now, except for the quiet hum of the purifiers and the gentle lapping of water in the tub. I was safe. I was in control. My world was down to this one sealed box, and the infinite world inside my head. It was all I needed. I was drying off when I heard it. A sound. At the door. It wasn't the angry pounding of Henderson. It was a soft, hesitant tapping. Barely audible. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. I stood motionless, a towel around my waist. Every sense was on high alert. The camera feed showed the hallway was empty. But the sound was real. It came again, a little more insistent. Then, a voice. It was weak, hoarse, and filtered through the thick steel, but I knew it instantly. It was the voice I had told myself I would never hear again. Leo? Leo, please. It's me. Jessica, please, help me. The name hung in the air, a ghost from a life that had ended 3 days ago. Jessica. I did not move. The towel was still knotted around my waist, water from my bath cooling on my skin. The silence in my apartment was a physical presence. On the monitor, the hallway was empty. The sound must have traveled, thinned by the layers of steel and sealant. Tap, tap, softer this time, a sound made by knuckles, not a fist. A sound of submission. Then her voice again, closer to the door, a desperate whisper scraped raw. Leo, I know you're in there. Please, Tom is with me. We need help. There's no water. I walked to the monitor, my bare feet silent on the floor. I zoomed the camera in. They were pressed against the wall beside my door, trying to stay out of the people's direct line of sight. A pointless effort. Her hair was plastered to her scalp with sweat and grime. The expensive blouse she wore was torn at the shoulder. And Tom. His tailored suit was stained and rumpled, the tie gone. His face was puffy, his eyes bloodshot. The swagger he always wore like a second skin was gone, replaced by a tremor in his hands. I watched them for a full minute. I watched him run a dry tongue over cracked lips. I watched her shiver, even in the stuffy heat of the hallway. The power chose that moment to die. The lamps flickered and went out. The low hum of the air purifiers ceased. The monitor showing the hallway turned to black. The building was plunged into a thick, final darkness. Outside my door, I heard Jessica let out a small, terrified gasp. I did not flinch. I waited 5 seconds, counting the beats in my chest. Then I walked to the utility closet, my movements practiced. A flip of a breaker, a heavy click, and the deep, muffled rumble of my personal gasoline generator vibrated through the floor. The lights came back on. The purifiers whirred back to life. The monitor flickered on, showing the same pathetic scene in the hall. To them, it must have sounded like God starting the world again. Leo. Tom's voice was a bark of renewed hope. I heard that. You have a generator. For God's sake, man, open the door. I walked to the door. I took a cold bottle of pristine, spring-fed water from a small cooler I kept by the entrance. The condensation felt slick and cool in my hand. I unbolted the 4 deadbolts. The sound of each heavy, metal tumbler sliding back echoed in the hallway like a death sentence being commuted. I turned the handle and pulled the steel door inward. I leaned against the frame, blocking the entrance. The clean, cool air from my apartment washed over them. I saw their nostrils flare. Tom stared at the bottle in my hand like a pilgrim seeing a holy relic. Jessica's eyes, wide and pleading, were fixed on my face. What do you want? I asked. My voice was even. Water, Jessica breathed. Just a little water, please. I looked past her, at Tom. He was the one who had taken her. He was the one who had smirked at the office when I was laid off. I held up the bottle, letting the light catch the clear liquid inside. I saw him swallow, his Adam's apple bobbing. You want it? I said, my voice low. Neil, lick my shoe. His face cycled through a storm of emotions. Shock, rage, humiliation. He glanced at Jessica, whose own face was a mask of horror and disbelief. You go to hell, Tom snarled, his pride flaring like a dying match. I have water, I said, unscrewing the cap. The small crackle of plastic breaking its seal was the loudest sound in the world. I took a slow, deliberate swallow. The water was cold and perfect. You have thirst. Hell is a matter of perspective. Tom's jaw worked. His eyes darted from my face, to the water, to Jessica. I could see the battle inside him. The man he was, versus the animal he was becoming. Jessica put a hand on his arm, her knuckles white. Tom, don't. But her plea was drowned out by the rasp of his own breathing. Thirst was a fire in his throat. I could see it burning in his eyes. A tremor ran through his body. With a groan that was half rage and half surrender, he sank to his knees. The sound of his expensive trousers hitting the filthy corridor floor was deeply satisfying. He lowered his head, his gaze fixed on my simple running shoe. He leaned forward. I could smell the sour scent of his sweat. Just as his face was inches from my foot, I chuckled. A short, dry sound. I changed my mind. I took the bottle of water and tipped it onto the floor next to him. The clear liquid splashed onto the grime, forming a dark, rapidly shrinking puddle. He stared at it, his face a perfect picture of brokenness. "Get out," I said. Then I looked at Jessica. Her face was streaked with tears. Tears for him? For herself? It didn't matter. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small loaf of bread I'd baked this morning in the space. The smell of it, warm and rich, cut through the hallway's stink. Her eyes locked onto it. I broke off a piece, the crust making a soft tearing sound. I tossed it onto the floor between them. "For you," I said. "Eat." What happened next was fast. Animalistic. Tom, still on his knees, lunged for it. Jessica, forgetting all dignity, scrambled for it. Their hands met over the small piece of bread. He snarled, a sound from the back of his throat, and shoved her. She fell back, hitting the wall. He snatched the bread, stuffing it into his mouth, his cheeks bulging as he chewed frantically, crumbs clinging to his lips. I watched them, the successful boss, the beautiful girlfriend, scrabbling over a piece of bread on a dirty floor. Then I slammed the door. The heavy deadbolts slid home. Clack, 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 clack. Their muffled shouts and sobs from the other side were a distant thing, the soundtrack to another world. I went to the kitchen. I took a thick, marbled ribeye from the space. The slab of meat was cool and heavy in my hand. I seasoned it with salt and pepper I'd ground myself. I put a cast iron skillet on the stove. A splash of oil. The generator purred, powering the induction cooktop. The steak hit the screaming hot pan with a loud, aggressive sizzle. The smell of rendering fat and searing beef filled my sanctuary. Outside, I could hear Jessica weeping. I flipped the steak, searing the other side to a perfect crust. I sat at my table and ate, the sounds of my fork and knife scraping against the plate covering the last of her cries. The meat was tender, rich, bloody in the middle. A taste of a world I now owned completely. Later, I checked the cameras. They were gone, but my actions had not gone unnoticed. Henderson from 2A was back, this time with a small group of younger, stronger-looking men. They had a crowbar. They took turns trying to wedge it into the seam of my steel door. The metal screamed in protest, but the frame I had welded to the building's concrete structure held firm. They gave up after 20 minutes, panting and sweating, their new little gang defeated. The building was descending into its own form of tribalism, the strong taking from the weak. Today, I was the strong. I spent the afternoon tending to my real home. Inside the space, the air was warm and smelled of damp earth and life. I walked to the far corner where I had planted a single seed pried from a strange, thorny vine I'd found in an obscure botanical catalog. The water from the spirit stream had made it grow. Now, a thick, metallic green vine, as thick as my wrist, snaked across the ground for 20 feet. It was covered in thorns that looked like sharpened pieces of rebar. The ironwood vine, the catalog had called it. I focused, pushing that green warmth inside me, that new power. I willed the tip of the vine to move. It sluggishly lifted, swaying like a cobra. I made it strike a large rock. It hit with a solid thwack, leaving a white scar on the stone. It was slow, draining. It felt like trying to push a car. But it was a start. I drank from the stream, the fatigue washing away instantly. As night fell outside, a new alert chimed on my tablet. A single, repeating broadcast had broken through the static on the emergency frequencies. It was a recorded military message. A grim, official voice announcing a nationwide state of emergency, acknowledging the biochemical atmospheric event, and advising all citizens to remain in shelter. They were establishing secure zones, but the locations were vague, the timelines uncertain. It was a confession of failure. The old world was officially dead. I switched the monitors to the outside cameras. The acid mist had dissipated, but the city was dark. No streetlights, no lit windows. Just an abyss. But it wasn't empty. Something was new. A smell, faint at first, seeping through even my filters. It was sweet and metallic, like old blood and overripe fruit. I looked at the street-level camera. A haze was forming. It wasn't like the yellow acid mist. This was different. It clung to the ground, swirling in unseen currents. And it was tinged with a faint, chemical red. The light from my own generator-powered floodlight, angled down from a window slit, illuminated it. It looked like the entire world was bleeding. The broadcast had said to stay inside. Now I knew why. The second act was beginning. The sweet, metallic smell grew stronger. It pushed through the filters, a cloying perfume of rot and copper. I killed the lights in the main room, leaving only the blue glow of the monitor array. Outside, the red mist wasn't a fog anymore. It was a dense, ground-hugging soup, swirling in the weak wash of my downward-angled floodlight. It did look like the world was bleeding out onto the pavement. The city had gone silent. The sirens, the sporadic gunshots, the screaming, it had all faded out over the last few hours. The emergency broadcast was gone too. Only static hissed from the speakers. This was a new quiet. A heavy, listening quiet. My powers felt different. The green energy inside my chest, the thing I pulled from the grove, was buzzing. It was agitated, alert. Before, controlling the ironwood vine was like pushing a heavy weight. Now, it felt like holding a live wire. I focused, extending a thin tendril of my will. A small, exploratory vine, no thicker than a pencil, slithered from the pot in the corner. It moved with a new swiftness, a liquid grace. It flowed across the floor and under the steel door, squeezing through the tight rubber seal at the bottom. On the monitor connected to the vine's tip, a trick I had learned, seeing the world through its skin, the hallway was a nightmare painted in shades of red. The mist was thick here, pooling in the low spots. I saw Henderson from 2A. He was on his back, his chest a cavity of shredded meat and fabric. His crowbar lay near his outstretched hand. The group of young men he had gathered were scattered down the hall, twisted into shapes they were not meant to hold. Nothing was moving. I retracted the vine. The little bit exposed to the mist was slick with a red, oily film. I went to the kitchen and pulled a hard, green apple from the space. The air in the grove was clean, smelling of rich soil and fresh water. A different universe. I came back to the main room, biting into the apple. The loud crack and the burst of crisp, sour juice was an obscenity in the silence. That's when the sound started again. Not the pleading taps of before. Not the angry thud of a crowbar. This was a wet, rhythmic pounding. Thump, slap, thump, slap. It was the sound of a body being thrown against my door. Over and over. I turned up the volume on the exterior microphone. A new noise came through. A low, guttural growl, a wet rattle from a throat that wasn't working right anymore. I walked to the door and looked through the reverse peephole. It was Tom, or what was left of him. His face was pushed against the reinforced metal, cheek flattened, mouth open. A thick, dark drool, the color of rust, ran down his chin and onto the door. His eyes were wide, but the vibrant blue I remembered was gone, replaced by a milky, cataract-like film. He wasn't seeing, he was just aimed. He pulled back, his movements stiff and uncoordinated, and threw himself at the door again. Thump! The steel shuddered. Behind him, Jessica was on her hands and knees. Her head lolled on her neck, her chic blonde hair matted with blood and grime. She was clawing at the floor, her nails leaving splintered grooves in the cheap laminate. She made a similar sound, a high-pitched, gargling keen. The same milky film covered her eyes. The ambitious boss, the beautiful girlfriend, they were just meat now. Meat that moved. I took another bite of the apple. The crunch was deafening. I watched them. I watched several other neighbors, faces I recognized from the building's community flyers, staggering in the hallway. Some were missing limbs. All had the same eyes, the same mindless, driving purpose. They slammed into walls, into each other, and into my door. My fortress. My sanctuary. The pounding from Tom intensified. He was using his shoulder, then his head. A crack echoed through the metal. Not the door. His skull. He didn't seem to notice. He just drew back and slammed his head against the steel again. And again. I finished the apple, tossing the core into a waste bin. Enough entertainment. I closed my eyes. I reached for the green warmth inside me, for the predator I had planted. In the grove, the main trunk of the ironwood vine stirred. It was 20 feet long and as thick as a fire hose, its surface a dark, metallic green, studded with thorns like railroad spikes. From its tip, I cultivated a single, smaller extension. A thin barb, no thicker than my finger, but needle-sharp and impossibly hard. I pushed it, feeding it my energy. It shot across the rich soil of my private world, a green spear. In my apartment, the small vine I had used for scouting stirred again. It crept from under the door, silent and unnoticed amidst the groaning and thumping. It rose from the floor like a cobra, swaying for a moment. Tom, in his frenzy, didn't see it. He drew his head back for another impact. I gave the command. The vine struck. It didn't aim for his ruined forehead. It shot upward, under his chin, punching through the soft tissue below his jaw. There was a wet, popping sound. The vine pierced straight up into his brainstem. All movement ceased. Tom froze, his head cocked back at an unnatural angle. The milky eyes stared at the ceiling. A tremor ran through his body, and then he collapsed, a puppet with its strings cut. He fell sideways, pulling the vine out with a thick, syrupy sound. Dark, reddish fluid poured from the wound onto the floor. Jessica, on her knees, seemed to sense the change. She stopped clawing the floor and slowly, stiffly, turned her head toward Tom's body. A low moan escaped her throat. She began crawling towards him. I didn't watch the rest. I pulled the vine back under the door. It left a dark, wet trail. I had no interest in killing her. No interest in any of them, unless they became a direct problem. Tom was a problem. Now he wasn't. I walked over to my media server, the generator humming its steady, reassuring tune. I scrolled through the terabytes of movies I had downloaded. I picked one, an old action film full of explosions and gunfights. The sound of theatrical gunfire filled my apartment, a comfortable blanket of noise that drowned out the wet, tearing sounds from the hallway. But I wasn't careless. After the movie, I went to work. I sat on the floor in front of my door and concentrated. I summoned more vines, not for attack, but for defense. I wove them into a thick, dense latticework a few inches behind the steel door. A wall of thorns. The ironwood vine was hungry for the energy in the red mist, and it responded eagerly. If they ever breached the main door, they would throw themselves onto a wall of spikes. They would impale themselves. The thought was satisfying. Later, I reviewed the footage from my vine's brief excursion. I replayed the moment of the kill, slowing it down. As Tom's head snapped back, something small and bright had fallen from the wound. It clattered on the floor, unnoticed. I focused my will, sending the thin vine out one more time. It was a risk, but my curiosity was a powerful force. The vine snaked across the floor, past Jessica, who was now hunched over Tom's body, making chewing sounds. The vine's tip nudged the small object. It was hard, crystalline. The vine wrapped around it and retracted, pulling it back under the door. It lay on my floor, clean of any blood. It was a crystal, about the size of a thumbnail. It was a deep, blood red, and it pulsed with a faint, inner light. I picked it up. It was warm to the touch, and the moment my skin made contact, the green power inside me surged. It felt like drinking a shot of pure energy. The crystal's red glow dimmed slightly, and I felt stronger, clearer. The fatigue from controlling the vines vanished. This was a game changer. This was fuel. Miles away, in the cavernous, echoing darkness of a looted superstore, Sarah ducked behind a toppled aisle of canned goods. The air was thick with the smell of spilled detergent and decay. 3 of them. There were 3 of them hunting her. They were her former squad mates. Men she had trusted her life with. Now they were just things, their uniforms torn, their faces slack, their movements jerky and fast. They were faster than the ones outside. Sarah, a voice hissed from her right. It was Miller, the only other one left. He was pressed against a pallet of bottled water, his face pale in the gloom. We have to get to the roof. The helo isn't coming, Mike, she whispered back, her voice tight. Her rifle was empty. She was down to her sidearm and a combat knife. They had been holding this store for 2 days, waiting for an evac that never came. Then the red mist had seeped in through the broken skylights. A can of beans rolled off a high shelf and clattered on the concrete. One of the things whipped its head around, its milky eyes locking onto the source of the noise. It let out a gurgling shriek and charge. Move, Miller yelled, pushing to his feet and firing his pistol. Pop, pop. The rounds hit the thing in the chest, staggering it but not stopping it. Miller swore and scrambled back. Sarah broke cover, running for the employee access corridor. Her body felt like it was on fire. A fever had taken hold hours ago, but there was no time to be sick. Her breath sought in her lungs. She risked a glance back. The other 2 things had converged on Miller. He went down screaming. She slammed the heavy staff door shut, fumbling with the lock. The things started pounding on the other side, the metal groaning under their assault. She leaned against the cool steel, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her vision swam. The fever was getting worse. Her hand, braced against the door, suddenly felt cold. A deep, piercing cold that had nothing to do with fear. It was a cold that burned. She looked down. A thin layer of frost was spreading from her fingertips onto the metal of the door. The frantic pounding from the other side slowed, the impacts becoming heavier, more sluggish. The metal of the door was turning white with ice. Back in my apartment, I held the red crystal up to the light. The old world was dead. Law and order were concepts from a history book. The broadcast had said to stay sheltered. They had no idea, the real threat wasn't the mist. It was what came after. The city was a hunting ground now, and the apartments around me were just nests of the mindless dead. But in my hand, I held power. A way to get stronger in this new world. I looked at the dark monitor showing the hallway. Jessica had finished with Tom's corpse and was now mindlessly battering the wall opposite my door. I thought about the seed catalog, about the other exotic plants I had bought on a whim. The exploding spore pods, the hallucination pollen flowers, the razor grass. My grove was a garden. It was an armory. I dropped the crystal into a small pouch. A new currency for a new age. What was this thing, and how many more were out there? The crystal in my hand was warm, a steady heat that seeped into my palm. It pulsed with a weak red light, like the dying ember of a fire. I closed my fingers around it. The surge of energy from the first touch was gone. Holding it did nothing. I tried to draw power from it, focusing my will the same way I did with the vine, trying to pull the warmth into myself. Nothing. It remained a simple, warm rock. Useless. I walked to the center of the room. The grove was a thought away. With a flicker of concentration, the apartment around me dissolved and I was standing on rich, dark soil under a sky that was always a perfect noon. The air smelled of clean water and living things. A sanctuary. I held the crystal up. It looked out of place here, a blood clot of a thing in a world of green and brown. A failed experiment. On impulse, I threw it. It sailed through the air and landed with a soft thud on the dirt 10 feet away. The reaction was immediate. The ground where the crystal landed turned black. Not dark brown, but a deep, lightless black. Veins of this blackness shot out across the soil like lightning in reverse, spreading in a web. The entire 1-hectare plot shuddered. It was not a gentle tremor. It was a deep, violent lurch, like the shifting of tectonic plates. I braced myself, planting my feet as the ground bucked. The sound was a low groan, the sound of a world being torn apart and remade. The far edges of my space, previously a misty, undefined wall, ripped open. New land surged into existence, the rich soil boiling up from nothing. The air crackled. The stream that bisected the plot, my spring of life, overflowed its banks. The sound of its water became a roar. When the shaking stopped, everything was bigger. The space had doubled. Where there had been 1 hectare, there were now 2. The stream was wider, the current faster. The energy inside me, the connection to this place, felt deeper, stronger. I could feel the accelerated time ratchet up a notch. A subtle pressure change. Before, 1 day outside was 30 inside. Now, it was more. I did the math. The cycle felt a third faster. 1 to 40. 40 days of growth for every one of sun and death outside. The crystal was gone. The ground had eaten it. This was not a rock. This was food. This was fuel. I returned to the apartment. The silence from the hallway was a weight. I looked at the monitor displaying the corridor cam. Jessica's body was a heap of torn cloth and meat near the far wall. The others were scattered, frozen in their last, mindless poses. A hunting ground. A mine. I went to the window, the one overlooking the street. It was sealed with steel shutters I'd bolted in myself. But the set overlooking the interior hallway was different. It was smaller, reinforced with polycarbonate and a steel grill, but it was designed to be opened. A firing port. I unlatched the heavy deadbolts. I pushed it open just a crack, no wider than my hand. The smell hit me. Rot. Old blood. I sat on a stool, positioning myself a few feet back from the opening. I closed my eyes and summoned the vine. Not the main trunk, but a single, lean tendril, honed by my will. It was faster now, more responsive. It flowed from the pot, across the floor, and through the sliver of open window like a green serpent. On the monitor linked to its senses, I saw the hallway in low-light vision. My first target was a man in a ripped business suit, one of the executives from the floor above. He was standing motionless, staring at a patch of peeling paint on the wall. A perfect target. I guided the vine, keeping it low to the ground. It was silent, its movement a fluid ripple over the stained laminate. It crept up behind him. It rose. I gave the command. The vine struck, a silent, green piston. The sharpened tip, hard as steel, punched through the back of his skull. The sound was a wet crunch, like stepping on a snail. The body jerked once, a violent, full-body spasm, then went limp. It collapsed forward, hitting the floor with a heavy, meaty slap. As the vine retracted, a small, red object fell from the wound, clattering softly on the floor. The new crystal pulsed with a brighter, more vibrant light than the one from Tom. I didn't retrieve it yet. The game was not over. From one of the other apartments, I heard a sound. A muffled sob. A woman's voice, trying and failing to be quiet. A floorboard creaked above me. Someone else was alive, hiding, listening, starving. I wondered if they could hear the soft impacts from the hallway. I wondered what they thought they were. My next target was a woman in a jogging outfit. She was mindlessly clawing at the drywall, her fingernails leaving white scars. I maneuvered the vine. The process was the same. A silent approach. The rise. The strike. Thunk. She fell without a sound. Another crystal dropped, spinning on the floor before settling. I became a fisherman, my apartment a safe boat, the hallway a fish-filled pond. I cast my line of living wood, reeled in a life, and watched the prize drop. One by one, I cleared the hallway. Each kill was identical, cold, efficient, a simple, physical transaction. Life for fuel. There were 7 of them on my floor. I killed all 7. The hallway was littered with their bodies, and 7 small, red lights glowed in the gloom. I sent the vine out again, this time to collect the bounty. It wrapped its tip around each crystal, one by one, and brought them back through the window. I laid them out on the table. They were all warm, all pulsed with the same inner light. 8 in total, including the one from Tom. 8 meals for my hungry world. I closed and bolted the window. The job was done. The air in my apartment felt thick with the smell from the hall. I turned on the ventilation system. The low hum of the fans was a comforting sound. In the kitchen, I opened the space and pulled out a fresh steak, thick and marbled. I took out a crisp head of lettuce, a firm, red tomato. The sounds were loud in the quiet room. The wet slap of the steak on the cutting board. The sharp crack of the knife slicing through lettuce. The sizzle as the seasoned meat hit the hot, oiled pan filled the air with the smell of cooking fat and spices. I ate at the dining table, looking at the security monitors. The screen showing the hallway was a tableau of death I had created. The screen showing the street below showed more of them, shambling in the dusk. I did not care. I took a bite of the perfectly cooked steak. It was delicious. Later, I fed the crystals to the grove. I stood in the center of my expanding world and tossed them, one by one, onto the ground. Each one was swallowed by the black soil, and with each one, I felt a tremor run through the space. A jolt of raw power. The space didn't expand further, but it became richer. The green energy inside me swelled, no longer a simple warmth but a churning river. I could feel the potential coiling in the soil. I focused on the main trunk of my ironwood vine. It lay half submerged in the rich earth, already thicker, its thorns longer. I poured my new, amplified energy into it. I commanded it to change, to become a better weapon. I pushed the accelerated time of the grove into the process. Hours passed inside the space for every minute outside. I watched as the vine's dark green skin hardened, taking on a metallic, almost black sheen. The thorns at its tip condensed, merging and sharpening into a single, needle-pointed barb, a living spearhead. The fibers within it twisted, becoming denser, stronger. It was no longer just a blunt instrument. It was a weapon designed for one purpose: piercing flesh and bone. Miles away, in a sterile, temporary lab set up in a military bunker, a technician pointed at a screen. "Sir, we have confirmation from Site Beta and Gamma. The anomaly is present in all evolved subjects." On the screen was a magnified image of a red crystal, identical to the ones on my table. A man in a general's uniform stared at it, his face grim. "What is it?" "We don't know its composition," the technician said, typing rapidly. "But it's a potent energy source. Extremely dense. When introduced to a current, the output is phenomenal. We're calling it a bioenergy source, Tier 1. It only appears in subjects that have processed biological matter." The general's eyes were cold. "Processed? You mean after they've fed?" "Yes, sir. It appears to be a byproduct of their metabolism. A key to their evolution. And, perhaps, a key for us." Sarah ran. The concrete of the parking garage was cold under her worn boots. Her breath plumed in the frigid air. The fever was gone, replaced by a deep, unnatural cold that lived in her bones. Behind her, she heard the shouts. "Spread out. Box her in. I want her alive, you hear me? Alive." It was Decker's voice. Her captain, the man who had left Miller to die. 2 of her squad mates, their faces hard and determined, fanned out to her left and right. They weren't aiming for a kill shot. They were aiming for her legs. They were hurting her. She ducked behind a concrete pillar, her back hitting the rough surface hard. Her sidearm was empty. She had her knife and her newfound power. The cold. She pressed her palm against the pillar. Frost spider webbed across the concrete, a crackling sound of ice being born. Decker, why? She yelled, her voice echoing in the garage. His laughter came back, mocking and ugly. Why? Because you're the prize, Sarah. You hit the jackpot and you don't even know it. We saw what you did at the store. That kind of power, it shouldn't be wasted on a grunt. A bullet ricocheted off the pillar near her head, sending chips of concrete stinging against her cheek. They were getting closer. They were going to take her. They were going to take this thing inside her. Back in my fortress, I surveyed my haul. 8 crystals spent, my power amplified, my main weapon upgraded. I looked at the monitor showing the clean, silent hallway. This floor was safe now, but it was only one floor in a building full of the dead. And the building was one of thousands in a city of millions. The apartment felt small. It was a cage, a well-stocked, secure cage, but a cage nonetheless. It had served its purpose as a starting point. But for what I was planning, for the empire I intended to build, I needed more. I needed land, I needed water, I needed walls that weren't shared with anyone. I thought of the isolated villa, the one on the outskirts of the city, with its own high walls and empty fields. The one I had leveraged every last cent to buy, the purchase that had earned me pitying looks from my colleagues and scorn from Jessica. A foolish, impractical dream home for a man with no ambition. The time had come to claim my kingdom. It was time to move. The apartment was a husk. I had stripped it bare. Every tool, every can of food, every box of bullets, every roll of toilet paper had been absorbed into the grove. All that remained were the heavy steel shutters I'd bolted to the windows and the monitors that showed a dead world. My preparations were finished. It was day 10. Time to go. My hand rested on the triple-locked steel door. I had spent days feeding my space nearly 50 of the red crystals, a harvest from the entire floor. The grove was no longer just a large field, it was a territory. The energy it fed back to me was a constant current under my skin. My body was hard, dense. I could move faster and hit harder than any athlete I'd ever seen. My power had sharpened. I no longer needed a potted plant as a conduit. The vines now answered a call from nowhere, from the space itself. I listened. The building was a tomb that occasionally groaned. Far below, the city moaned, the constant, low-decibel chorus of the shambling dead. But the immediate hallway was a different kind of quiet. A human quiet. I had heard them a few times over the past couple of days. Voices. Laughter that was too loud. The sound of a door being kicked in 2 floors down. Survivors. The dangerous kind. I turned the first deadbolt. The sound was a loud, heavy clunk that echoed in the pre-dead silence. I paused, listened. A floorboard creaked down the hall. Faintly, a man's voice. The hell was that? A second voice, younger, answered. Check it out. I undid the other 2 locks. I didn't reach for the rifle slung over my back. I didn't need it. I took a deep breath, the filtered air of my apartment a final luxury. Then I pulled the door open and stepped out. They were halfway down the hall. 4 of them, young men, 20-somethings, wearing scavenged clothes and the kind of hungry, feral grins that only appear after society has collapsed. The leader had a length of rebar in his hand, its end sharpened to a crude point. Another held a fire axe. They had been about to try the door of the apartment next to mine. They stopped when they saw me. They saw a man, alone. They saw the clean, well-maintained rifle on my back, the heavy pack, the sturdy boots. They didn't see me as a threat. They saw a supply cache on legs. The leader with the rebar took a step forward. He gestured with his weapon. Whoa, look what we got here. Prepper boy, that's a nice-looking bag you got. A real nice gun, too. His friends fanned out, their movements sloppy but meant to be intimidating. They were blocking the path to the stairwell. Gonna have to ask you to hand that all over, the leader said. His smile was all teeth. Food, water, whatever you got. Don't make this hard. I said nothing. My eyes scanned them. 4 targets. Close quarters. Their postures were aggressive but undisciplined. Their eyes held a mix of greed and low cunning. They were jackals who had just found what they thought was a lone sheep. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched them. My silence seemed to unnerve them more than any threat would have. The one with the axe shifted his weight. You deaf, asshole? He said, give us the stuff. I acted. It was not a conscious thought to attack. It was a simple command. Emerge, strike. From the empty air behind me, 5 serpents of dark, metallic green wood ripped into existence. They made no sound as they manifested, just a flicker in the air, a distortion of space. They were the ironwood vines, each as thick as my arm, tipped with a needle-sharp barb of condensed wood. The air hissed as they shot forward. The 4 men didn't even have time to scream. Their eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief turning to raw terror. The leader raised his rebar. It was useless. The first vine whipped around his neck, the force of it snapping his head back with a wet crunch. Before his body could fall, a second vine punched directly through the center of his chest. A spray of red mist erupted from his back, painting the wall behind him. His eyes went blank. The man with the fire axe swung wildly. A vine met his arm, wrapping around it. I heard the clear, sharp snap of bone. He made a choked, gurgling sound as another vine speared up under his jaw, driving through his tongue and into his brain. He crumpled, a marionette with its strings cut. The other 2 tried to run. They were too slow. The remaining vines were on them in an instant, a flurry of green impacts. One was impaled through the gut, lifted off his feet and slammed against the wall. The last one was simply coiled, the vine wrapping around his torso and squeezing. I heard his ribs crack like dry twigs, and a final, choked gasp escaped his lips as his lungs were crushed. It took less than 5 seconds. The vines retracted, melting back into the nothingness from which they came. They left no trace, save for the carnage they had wrought. 4 bodies lay twisted on the stained laminate floor. The hallway was silent again, the only sound the slow drip of blood from a corpse onto the ground. I stepped over the leader's body, my boots squelching in the spreading pool of his blood. I didn't look at them. They were an obstacle that had been removed. Nothing more. As I walked toward the stairwell door, I heard another sound. From the apartment the men had been about to break into. A faint click as a deadbolt was quietly, desperately thrown. A woman's muffled sob, a child's whimper, quickly shushed. They had heard it all. The single, sharp snap of bone. The wet impacts. The silence that followed. They didn't know what I was, but they knew it was worse than the men who had been at their door. I kept walking. Their fear was not my concern. The stairwell was cold. The air tasted of dust and decay. I descended 20 flights of stairs, my footsteps the only sound. The walls were covered in streaks of old blood and handprints from the first days of chaos. I passed 2 bodies, long dead, their flesh torn and gnawed. The city outside was a constant, low drone. The parking garage was a concrete cavern of shadows and echoes. The emergency lights were dead. I navigated by the faint, gray light filtering through the grime-caked security grille. My truck was where I left it. A Ford F-250, its suspension reinforced, its windows covered with steel mesh. A beast built for this new world. Miles away, frost bloomed on brickwork. It grew in frantic, crystalline patterns, sheeting across the damp alley wall. Sarah gasped, her breath a cloud of white vapor. The cold came from her, an aura of impossible frost that clung to everything. 2 men lay at her feet, their bodies flash-frozen into brittle statues, their faces masks of shock. Decker, her captain, was backing away, terror finally breaking through his greedy confidence. "What are you?" he stammered, raising his pistol with a trembling hand. "You left him," she whispered, her voice raw. "You left Miller to die. He was bait. You're the prize, Sarah." That power. She didn't let him finish. With a final, desperate scream, she threw her hands forward. A wave of absolute zero washed through the alley. Decker was encased instantly, a figure of ice, his scream frozen in his throat. The effort was too much. The world swam, the alley tilted, the gray sky spinning. The strength drained from her limbs, and the deep, unnatural cold that was her power retreated, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. She fell to her knees, then collapsed onto the cold, wet pavement. Her consciousness faded. Her last thought was of the sound. A low, rhythmic scraping. A guttural moan. From both ends of the alley, figures were shambling forward. Drawn by the scream. Drawn by the living warmth that was now unprotected and helpless on the ground. The engine of the F-250 turned over with a deep, reassuring roar that shattered the garage's silence. The headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a path to the ramp. I put the truck in gear and drove, the heavy tires crunching over scattered debris. The ramp's security gate was twisted metal, already torn open. I pushed through it and emerged onto the street. The world was gray, a permanent, oppressive overcast sky hung low over the city. The buildings were silent monoliths, their windows like dead eyes. The dead were everywhere, they wandered aimlessly, drawn by sound, by movement, by the distant memory of life. They paid my truck no mind. It was just another piece of metal, a rolling rock in their dead world. I navigated the abandoned cars and debris-strewn streets, heading for the highway that would take me out of the city's rotten heart. My destination was the villa, my fortress, my kingdom. Idly, my hand went to the radio console, a habit from a world that no longer existed. I switched it on, static hissed from the speakers. I twisted the dial, scanning the frequencies. More static. The bands were dead, the world had gone silent. Then, I caught it. A flicker of a signal, buried in the noise. One there. Repeat. 63rd and Elm. Trapped. Second floor of the deli. They're outside, please. The voice was female, laced with a fear that was sharp and clear even through the crackle of the transmission. It was weak, looping the same desperate plea. I looked at the GPS I'd mounted on the dash. 63rd and Elm. It was 3 blocks from my current position. On my route, a distraction, a problem that was not my own. Saving people was a fool's errand. It invited trouble, invited weakness. My plan was simple. Get to the villa, secure the walls, build my fortress. No deviations, no attachments. The voice crackled again, so many of them. God, please, anyone. I kept driving, my hands were steady on the wheel. The truck rumbled onward, a steel shell of indifference. But my eyes flickered to the street sign ahead. I was 2 blocks away. My foot, resting on the accelerator, did not press down harder. My foot did not press down harder. It did not ease off. The truck maintained its speed, a steady, unhurried crawl over the cracked asphalt. 63rd and Elm. 3 blocks. 2. A distraction. The plan was clear. Reach the villa, secure the perimeter, begin fortification, unload supplies from the grove, establish a self-sustaining system. Deviations were inefficiencies. Inefficiencies created vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities led to death. God, please, anyone. The voice on the radio was a ghost, a remnant of a dead world where people asked for help and sometimes received it. Helping her meant engaging. Engaging meant revealing my position, my capabilities. It meant taking on her problems, whatever they were. A person was not just a person. They were a nexus of past failures and future demands. A drain on resources. 1 block away, I could see the intersection. A pharmacy with its windows smashed in. A laundromat with clothes spilling out onto the sidewalk, covered in a film of gray dust. And a deli, its front window a gaping black hole. The source. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The logic was an unassailable fortress in my mind. Drive on. Her fate was sealed the moment her poor planning led her to this situation. It was not my responsibility. I turned the wheel. The F-250's heavy frame swung left onto Elm Street. The decision was not made in my heart. It was a cold calculation. A person with a radio, trapped and desperate, was bait. But a person who survived long enough to use a radio might also be an asset. The cost of a few minutes of observation was low. The potential gain was unknown, but not zero. It was a risk worth quantifying. I killed the headlights and let the truck roll to a stop 100 yards from the deli, tucked behind the hulk of an overturned city bus. The engine idled, a low thrum that was lost in the ambient moan of the city. From here, I had a clear view. The scene was a tableau of frozen violence. 3 bodies were on the sidewalk in front of the deli. They weren't torn or bitten. They were encased in a thick, unnatural layer of frost, their limbs locked in awkward angles, their faces perfect masks of surprise. One had his arm raised, a pistol still clutched in a hand that was now solid ice. The source of the cold was obvious. On the pavement, half sheltered by the deli's doorway, was a woman. She was motionless, face down. Even from this distance, I could see the dark, practical fabric of military-style pants and a jacket. Her power, then, a cryomancer, a powerful one, judging by the frozen corpses. But exhausted, helpless. The dead were coming. Not a horde, but a steady trickle. 8, maybe 10 of them, drawn from the surrounding streets by her earlier scream, the one I hadn't heard but could infer. They shambled, their movements jerky and uncoordinated, a slow tide of rot and hunger. They were closing in, and they were not the only ones watching. Across the street, crouched behind a rusted-out sedan, were 2 men. They wore mismatched gear, scavenged vests over civilian clothing. One held a rifle, the other a length of pipe. They were not looking at the zombies. They were looking at the woman. Waiting. I leaned forward, my ear close to the radio. The signal was stronger here. I could hear their comms bleeding over the same frequency she had used. Look at that. The bitch finally passed out, a low voice rasped. Ran herself dry, freezing Decker and the others. Good, a second voice replied, tight with anticipation. Let the walkers soften her up a bit. Makes our job easier. You saw what she did to them. I don't want to get close while she's still twitching. We just need the core, the first voice affirmed. Let them chew on her. Once they're busy, we move in, pop a few, I'll cut the crystal out of her chest. We're rich, man. An A-class ice core? The military base up north will give us a damn fortress for that. Hyenas, waiting for the lions to finish the kill. Their plan was sound, in a vile, pragmatic way. Let the dead spend their energy and attention on the target, then sweep in to pick up the prize. They would kill her if the zombies didn't finish the job first, pry the crystalline energy source from her body, and leave the rest. The first zombie reached her. It was a woman in what was once a business suit, its jaw hanging loose. It stooped, its filthy hands reaching for the unconscious woman's shoulder. I put the truck in gear. The roar of the F-250's engine was a sudden, violent sea-lie in the quiet street. I flicked the headlights on, high beams painting the scene in stark, unforgiving white light. The men behind the sedan flinched, momentarily blinded. The zombies turned, their dull eyes fixing on the new source of noise and light. I didn't give them time to react. My foot slammed the accelerator to the floor. The truck surged forward, a 1-ton steel battering ram. The impact was not a single crash. It was a series of wet, percussive thumps that shuddered through the truck's reinforced frame. The zombie woman disintegrated under the grill. The one behind her was thrown 15 feet, its body ragdolling through the air. The truck plowed through the small cluster of them without slowing, turning flesh and bone into a red smear on the pavement. I wrenched the wheel, the tires squealing as the truck swung around in a wide arc, its headlights now pinning the two men behind the sedan. They were panicked, scrambling. The one with the rifle was trying to bring it to bear, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. I didn't get out. I didn't reach for my own weapon. I sent the command, emerge, subdue. The asphalt in front of them cracked. It was not an explosion. It was a deliberate, powerful splitting of the ground. Two thick, dark green tendrils, slick as oil and hard as steel, erupted from the fissures. They were the ironwood vines, extensions of my will, born from the grove and given form in this broken world. The man with the pipe swung at the closest vine. The impact made a sound like a bat hitting a lamppost. The pipe dented, the vine was unscratched. Before he could swing again, the vine whipped around his legs, pulling him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, the air driven from his lungs in a grunt. The vine coiled around his torso, tightening with methodical pressure. I heard his ribs crack, a sound like dry branches snapping. A choked scream died in his throat. The rifleman managed to fire a single shot. The bullet sparked off the second vine's armored bark. The vine was on him in an instant. It didn't strike or crush. It moved like a serpent, wrapping around his rifle, twisting it from his grasp. It clattered to the pavement. Then the vine lashed around his neck, lifting him a foot off the ground, his legs kicking uselessly. He made gargling sounds, his face turning a deep, congested purple. I eased the pressure. He dropped to the ground, gasping, clutching his throat. The other man was pinned, wheezing in pain, unable to move. The street was silent again, save for the hum of my engine and the pained breathing of the two men. I put the truck in park, opened the door, and stepped out. The air smelled of blood and exhaust fumes. I walked past the twitching, ruined bodies of the zombies, my boots leaving clean prints in the gore. I didn't look at the captured men. They were secured. They were secondary. I knelt beside the woman. I rolled her over. Her face was pale, smudged with dirt, but her features were sharp and defined even in unconsciousness. A faint tracery of frost still clung to her eyelashes. I pressed 2 fingers to her neck. A pulse. Faint, thready, but there. Her skin was cold, not just the ambient chill of the pavement, but a deep, cellular cold that spoke of the power she had expended. She was an asset, a powerful one, worth the deviation. I scooped her up. She weighed very little. Her head lolled against my shoulder. I carried her to the truck and carefully placed her in the passenger seat, buckling the belt over her limp form. Then, I dealt with the trash. I walked over to the two men. The rifleman was on his hands and knees, coughing. The other was lying flat, his breathing shallow. The vines held them fast. Their eyes, when they looked at me, were filled with a terror far greater than anything the dead could inspire. They had seen something that didn't fit into their world of guns and scavenging. "Get up," I said. My voice was flat. The vines loosened just enough for them to stand, shakily. I grabbed a length of zip tie from my pack and bound their hands tightly behind their backs. The vines retracted, melting back into the asphalt without a trace, leaving only the cracked ground as evidence of their existence. I herded them to the back of the F-250 and forced them into the truck bed, their faces pressed against the cold steel. I climbed back into the driver's seat. The woman beside me hadn't stirred. The drive to the villa was swift. The suburbs were emptier, the dead spread thinner. 10 minutes later, I was pulling up to my destination. A 2-story modern villa, surrounded by a 3-meter-high concrete wall, sitting on a large corner lot. A heavy, black steel gate blocked the driveway. My kingdom. I got out and keyed the electronic lock. The gate slid open with a low hum. I drove the truck inside, onto the paved driveway, and the gate slid shut behind me, sealing us off from the world. First, I took the woman inside. The house was cold and smelled of dust and new paint. I laid her on a large leather sofa in the living room, covering her with a thick wool blanket I took from a storage box. Then, I went back outside. It was time for the first step. I walked to the main gate. The wind was picking up, carrying the faint, sweetish smell of decay from the city. I placed my palm flat against the cold steel bars. I closed my eyes, not in meditation, but in focus. I reached into the grove, into the boundless green energy within me, and pulled. The ground at the base of the gate churned. Dirt and gravel were pushed aside as dozens of ironwood vines, each as thick as my arm, pushed their way into the air. They moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, weaving themselves in and out of the steel bars. They wrapped around the thick posts, climbed the height of the gate, and covered every inch of it in a living, interlocking lattice of armored wood. Needle-sharp thorns, hard as nails, sprouted from their surface. Within a minute, the entire gate was a formidable, impenetrable wall of green and black thorny wood. A living barricade. Phase 1 had begun. I turned my attention to the two men huddled in the truck bed. They had watched the entire process, their faces drained of all color. I had gotten a bit of intelligence from their radio chatter. A military base up north. A market for D-Nong cores. Useful information. But I needed more. The layouts. The leadership. The defenses. Everything. I pulled the rifleman out of the truck and threw him onto the driveway. The other one scrambled back, his eyes wide. I stood over him. He was a resource. A container of information. And his purpose was nearly fulfilled. "Your friend is going to watch you die," I said, my voice as cold as the concrete beneath his knees. "I'm going to ask you questions. For every answer I don't like, I will have a vine break one of his bones. When he runs out of bones, I'll start on you. But if you tell me everything I want to know, right now, I'll make it quick for both of you." The man on the driveway sobbed. A wet, broken sound. His friend in the truck bed was silent, face pressed to the metal, trying to make himself small. I did not repeat the question. The air was cold. My breath made no cloud. It was day 12. Time was a resource, and I was done wasting it. I gave a silent command. One of the vines still holding the man in the truck bed, the one with the pipe, shifted its grip. It moved from his torso down to his left ankle. The man, whose name I didn't know and didn't care to, began to struggle. He twisted his body, kicking with his free leg. The vine did not budge. It was an extension of the earth, as unyielding as granite. The rifleman on the ground looked up at me, his eyes wide with incomprehension. He saw no wires, no mechanisms. Just a dark green tendril of wood holding his friend. "Please," he stammered, "please, we'll tell you anything. Just, what are you?" I ignored him. My attention was on the man in the truck. The vine tightened. There was a noise, a short, sharp crack. It was not loud, but it cut through the night. It sounded like a thick, dry stick being snapped over a knee. The man in the truck screamed. It was a high, thin sound of pure agony. He thrashed, but the vine held his leg firm, the broken bone grinding inside his skin. The rifleman flinched as if he had been struck. He stared at his friend, then back at me. The terror in his eyes was no longer about zombies or starvation. It was a new kind of fear. A fear of me. "The base," I said. The words were flat. My voice did not change pitch. Tell me about the base. The North Base, he blurted out, words tumbling over each other. The old National Guard armory on Route 9. Colonel Marcus is in charge. He's got maybe 100 men, real soldiers. They have Humvees, ammo, they trade. They'll trade anything for high-grade cores. A-class, S-class, they're trying to build some kind of power generator. How do you know? We traded with them before. Food, gas, for a couple of pistols. They're looking for people like her. He nodded his head towards the house, towards the woman I had carried inside. They call them primes. They say the core is purest from a living prime. His voice dropped to a whisper. They pay a fortune for them. More information than I expected. A fortified position, a clear leader, a demand for a specific resource. A resource I now possessed. The rifleman looked at his friend, who was now just whimpering, his body trembling. Is that enough? I told you, please, let him go. Their purpose was fulfilled. They were empty containers. Leaving them alive was a liability. They knew my location. They knew about my power. They knew I had an A-class cryomancer. I gestured with my head. Get out of the truck. The vine released the man with the broken ankle. He fell from the truck bed onto the concrete driveway with a wet slap and cried out again. The rifleman scrambled to help him, a useless gesture of solidarity. I walked back to my truck, pulled a roll of heavy-duty cable ties from my toolkit, and threw it on the ground in front of them. Tie his hands, I ordered the rifleman. Then your own, behind your backs, tightly. He hesitated for a second, then obeyed, his fingers fumbling. When they were both bound, I gave another command. 2 ironwood vines slithered from the ground. They were thinner this time, more flexible. They wrapped around the men's bound wrists and lifted them. They were dragged, scraping against the driveway, towards the large oak tree that dominated the front lawn. The vines snaked up the thick trunk, pulling the men with them. They were hoisted into the air, screaming and pleading, until they were hanging upside down, about 10 feet off the ground, their bodies swaying slightly in the breeze. Their panicked shouts echoed inside the walls of my new kingdom. I let them hang there, a warning to any who might be listening, and a stage for what was to come. I turned and walked back into the house. The woman was still on the sofa, covered by the wool blanket. Her breathing was shallow, her skin deathly pale. The cellular coldness I'd felt before was a deep chill that seemed to emanate from her core. She had pushed her power past its limit, and her body was paying the price. I knelt beside her. I could have used the spring water from the grove, but that was a resource to be conserved. My own power would suffice for this. I placed my palm over her forehead. It was like touching a block of ice. I closed my eyes and reached into myself, pulling on the deep, verdant energy of the grove. A flow of warmth, green and vibrant, streamed from my hand into her. It wasn't a fire's heat, but the warmth of life, of summer soil and growing things. I felt the steady drain on my own reserves. Under my palm, the unnatural coldness began to recede. The small cuts and scrapes on her face, souvenirs from her fall, slowly sealed themselves. Her skin color shifted from a waxy pale to a more natural tone. Her breathing deepened, becoming steady and regular. I pulled my hand back. The immediate danger had passed. Now, it was up to her. I went to the kitchen. From the grove's infinite storage, I materialized what I needed. A thick, perfectly marbled ribeye steak. A bottle of purified spring water. I cooked the steak on the gas stove I'd installed, searing it rare. The smell of cooking meat filled the dusty air of the house, a scent from a forgotten world. I placed the steak on a plate, poured the water into a clean glass, and carried them to the living room. As I approached, her eyes snapped open. They were not the eyes of a victim. They were the color of a winter sky, sharp and assessing. In a single, fluid motion, she was off the sofa and on her feet, her body coiled into a defensive stance. She ignored the pain that must have lanced through her exhausted muscles. Her gaze flicked from me to the plate in my hands, then to the exits. She was a predator, caged and wary. Who are you? Where am I? Her voice was tense, low. I did not answer. I set the plate and the glass on the coffee table in front of her. Eat. She stared at me, then at the food. The steak was still sizzling faintly. The water in the glass was so clear it seemed to vibrate. She saw no deception in my eyes, only a flat command. Her stomach must have been twisted in knots from hunger. After a long moment, the tension in her shoulders eased slightly. She picked up the fork, never taking her eyes off me, and cut a piece of the meat. When she put it in her mouth, her eyes closed. A shudder ran through her body. It was the reaction of someone who had likely been living on canned trash and stale crackers for 12 days. She ate quickly then, with a focused intensity, tearing into the steak like a wolf. She drained the glass of water in 3 long swallows. As the spring water hit her system, she froze. A look of astonishment crossed her face. She looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers. The deep, lingering fatigue, the cellular exhaustion from using her power, was vanishing. The water was not just quenching her thirst, it was refilling a wellspring of energy inside her. She looked up at me, the suspicion in her eyes now mixed with awe and confusion. What was in that water? I picked up the empty plate and turned towards the front door. Your business is outside. She followed me. As I opened the door, the sounds from the yard, which had faded to pained moans, became clear again. She stepped out onto the porch and saw them. The 2 men, her former comrades, were still hanging from the oak tree. Their faces were congested and purple, their eyes bulging. They stopped moaning when they saw her, their expressions twisting into a new kind of horror. Decker, Miller, she whispered, her voice tight with a cold fury. They left you for the dead, I said, standing beside her. They were waiting for the walkers to finish you so they could cut the core from your chest and sell it. That's what your life was worth to them. Her hands clenched into fists. A fine layer of frost began to form on the porch railing where her knuckles brushed against it. The air around her dropped several degrees. Rage, pure and cold, rolled off her in waves. They are yours, I said. My voice was the only thing in the yard that wasn't touched by the sudden chill. I am offering you a choice. Kill them, let go of the life that betrayed you, and walk a new path with me. I met her icy gaze. I can give you safety. I can give you food like you just ate, every day. I can give you the power to never be a victim again. In return, I require one thing. She didn't ask what it was. She already knew. She looked from me to the 2 swinging figures. There was no hesitation, no mercy. Get us down from here, Vera, please. Miller, the rifleman, begged. He's a monster. We can escape. Vera did not even look at him. She raised her right hand. The air itself seemed to crystallize. It was not a storm. It was a precise, focused application of will. Dozens of ice shards, each a foot long and as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, materialized in the air around the 2 men. They hung there for a heartbeat, shimmering in the light from the house. Then, with a slight flick of her wrist, she sent them forward. There was no sound of impact, only a series of wet, tearing noises. The men's bodies convulsed as the shards pierced them from every angle. Blood, dark in the dim light, welled from the wounds, freezing instantly on their clothes and skin. Their eyes went wide with a final, terminal surprise. Then they were still, 2 grotesque, bloody icicles dangling from an oak tree. Vera held her hand up for a moment longer, then let it drop. The surge of power left her breathing heavily, but her eyes were clear. The ghosts of her past had been exorcised. She turned to face me. Without a word, she dropped to one knee on the cold concrete of the porch. She bowed her head. My name is Vera. I pledge my loyalty to you. I had my first soldier. The rest of the night was spent in productive silence. While Vera stood guard, a silent, deadly statue on the porch, I began the next phase of fortification. From the grove, I brought out the seeds. Not normal seeds. These were specimens I had been cultivating, mutations accelerated by the grove's unique properties. Along the inside base of the concrete wall, I planted a row of thorn seedlings. They would grow into a living razor wire fence, their thorns laced with a paralyzing neurotoxin. In a corner of the yard, sheltered from view, I planted a patch of spore pods. They looked like small, gray stones. By morning, they would have sprouted into a small field of bioluminescent fungi, casting a soft, steady glow that would provide light without attracting unwanted attention from the sky. The age of electricity was over. The age of biology had begun. Vera watched it all, her military training warring with the impossibility of what she was seeing. A man who could summon vines from the pavement and produce mutated plants from thin air. She did not ask questions. She simply observed, adapted, and accepted the new reality. She was a soldier, and she had her new commander. As the first hint of gray light touched the eastern sky, I looked out over my domain. The gate was a fortress of thorns. The walls were lined with poison. The bodies of the traitors were a frozen testament to the price of betrayal. Vera stood at her post, an extension of my will. It was a start, a good start, but the scavengers had brought valuable news. A military base. A demand for cores. Conflict was inevitable. To survive conflict, you needed overwhelming force. Overwhelming force required resources. The grove needed energy to expand, to create more powerful plant life, to increase the ratio of time. I walked over to where Vera stood. She turned to face me, her posture perfect, her eyes alert. The dead, I said. Their bodies contain energy cores. We need them, a lot of them. She nodded once, understanding immediately. When do we move out? At dawn, I said. We hunt. The air was cold. Day 15. The wind was a constant, restless thing, scraping dust and old paper across the asphalt. It rattled the windows of the houses we passed, empty eyes in dead faces. My truck rumbled, the diesel engine a low growl in the quiet. I had spent the better part of a day welding scavenged steel plates to its doors and flatbed. It was no longer a civilian vehicle. It was an ugly, functional beast of burden. Vera sat in the passenger seat. She didn't speak. She cleaned her rifle, the methodical click-clack of the bolt sliding home the only sound besides the engine and the wind. Her movements were economical, precise. She had taken the 2 frozen corpses from the oak tree and moved them to the far side of the outer wall, a permanent warning. Then she had taken a shower, eaten a meal, and reported for duty. A soldier. That's what she was. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Our base was already changing. The ironwood vines I had planted along the concrete wall were thicker now, their dark green tendrils weaving into a dense, impassable mesh. The thorns were a darker shade of green, almost black. Near the gate, the first of the bioluminescent fungi were casting a soft, blue-green light, a strange, living glow in the gray morning. It was a fortress being born from the dirt. Our destination was a cluster of warehouses and small factories 3 miles south. A place where workers would have turned, trapped inside their workplaces. A high concentration of the dead. A high potential for cores. The grove hungered for them. The time dilation effect, the growth of more advanced defenses, it all required energy. We drove down the center of the road, weaving around silent, stalled cars. The dead were scarce here on the open road. We saw them sometimes, shambling alone or in pairs, drawn by the sound of our engine, but they were too slow, too stupid. They were obstacles, not threats. The industrial park rose from the flat landscape like a series of rusted monoliths. Shattered windows stared out from corrugated steel walls. A sign for a logistics company swung on one hinge, squeaking in the wind. I pulled the truck behind a large, overturned tanker, killing the engine. The sudden silence was heavy. The only sound now was the wind and a low, collective moan from within the park. The sound of 100 mindless things, waiting. Vera looked at me, her hand resting on the door handle. I gave a single nod. We got out. She moved to the front of the truck, her rifle held low. I stood beside her, resting my hands on the hood. I closed my eyes, reaching down, not with my hands, but with my mind. I felt them, the roots of weeds in the cracked pavement, the deep, dormant root system of an old maple tree near the fence. I was an extension of them now. I pushed a sliver of the grove's energy into the network. 50 yards ahead, at the main entrance to the warehouse complex, a length of thick vine, as dark as wet soil, erupted from a crack in the concrete. It was an ironwood vine, summoned from my personal space. It snaked across the ground, silent and fast. In front of it, a small group of 5 walkers turned, drawn by the movement. The vine did not attack. It whipped across the ground in front of them, striking the asphalt with a loud crack. They tripped, falling over each other in a clumsy pile. Vera didn't wait. A shard of ice, the size of a railroad spike, formed in the air beside her. It shot forward with a low hiss, striking the topmost walker in the skull. The thing's head shattered in a spray of frozen gore. 2 more spikes formed and flew, each one finding a target. It was clean, efficient. She was the hammer, I was the hand that positioned the nail. We moved forward, a silent, 2-person death squad. I used the vines to trip, to bind, to distract. A tendril would wrap around an ankle, sending a walker crashing to the ground. A thick root would burst from the earth, creating a momentary barrier. And Vera would finish them. Her power was a scalpel of absolute zero, each strike precise and fatal. We were not fighting, we were harvesting. We had cleared the main yard and were approaching the largest warehouse when a new sound cut through the moans. The clatter of another engine, louder and more poorly maintained than mine. A battered red pickup truck, its body pockmarked with dents, screeched to a halt at the entrance to the park. 4 men jumped out. They carried shotguns and baseball bats wrapped in barbed wire. The one who seemed to be the leader, a large man with a greasy beard and a shotgun held like a scepter, scanned the yard. He saw the dead walkers, the frozen remains, the shattered skulls. He saw us. He grinned, a flash of yellowed teeth. Well, well, look what we got here, he boomed, his voice echoing off the steel walls. Looks like someone did the hard work for us. His men fanned out, their posture arrogant. They were not looking at the remaining walkers milling in the shadows. They were looking at us. At Vera, at the rifle in her hands. Get the hell out of here, the leader shouted, pointing his shotgun in our general direction. This spot belongs to the Eagle team now. Drop your gear and scram, and we might let you walk. Vera's body tensed. The air around her grew colder. I placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent command to wait. I looked at the man. I looked at his followers. They saw 2 people. They thought us weak. They thought they were predators who had stumbled upon a free meal. I did not speak. I looked back at Vera and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to her left. She understood. She raised her free hand, palm facing the entrance where their truck was parked. The ground beneath it began to frost over. Then, with a deep groan that seemed to come from the earth itself, a wall of ice erupted. It was 10 feet high, 3 feet thick, and translucent, sealing the only way out. It glittered in the flat, gray light. The leader of the Eagle team stared at it, his jaw slack. What the? He never finished. I had already turned my attention to the warehouse behind us. I drove my will into the ground, not to grow anything, but to create a disturbance. A deep tremor shook the concrete floor. From inside the vast, dark space of the warehouse, a section of rusted metal shelving, weakened by years of neglect, came crashing down with a deafening shriek of tortured metal. The sound was a dinner bell in hell. From the dark maw of the warehouse, and from the alleys between the buildings, they came. Not 5 or 10, dozens, a wave of decay and hunger, their collective moan rising to a guttural roar. They were drawn by the noise, their single-minded focus now aimed directly at the center of the yard. At the Eagle team. Shit, get him, the leader screamed, finally realizing his mistake. He fired his shotgun into the front rank of the approaching horde. The blast tore a hole in the crowd, but more filled the gap instantly. I gave a gentle pull on Vera's arm. We retreated, moving up a rusty exterior staircase on the side of a smaller building. From the roof, we had a perfect view. The Eagle team was trapped. The ice wall to their backs, a tide of the dead to their front. I watched them die. The man with the bat was pulled down first. He swung wildly, crushing one skull before 3 more swarmed him, their hands tearing at his jacket, his face, his throat. His screams were high and short. One of his companions tried to help, firing his pistol into the mass, but it was useless. He was dragged down next. The leader was still firing his shotgun. Boom, click clack, boom, each shot bought him a second. He was backing towards his truck, towards the ice wall, his face a mask of panic. He glanced up and saw us, standing on the roof, watching. His eyes widened. He understood. You, he shrieked, his voice raw with terror and rage. You bastards. He tried to raise his shotgun towards us, but a walker grabbed his leg. He stumbled. The horde was on him. They covered him like ants on a piece of sugar. The sound was wet, a series of tearing, cracking noises. His screams stopped. There was only the sound of the feeding. We waited. 10 minutes. The walkers were occupied, distracted. When the sounds of their meal subsided, we moved. We descended the stairs and began the cleanup. It was easy. A walker with its back to us, feasting on a severed arm, was an easy target for an ice spike. A vine wrapped around an ankle, a quick stomp to the skull. We worked through the carnage, our boots sticking to the blood-soaked concrete. I used a hunting knife to cut the cores from the skulls of the dead. Walkers, members of the Eagle team, they were all the same now. Just resources. Each one was a small, gray stone, faintly warm to the touch. We piled them into a canvas bag. We cleared the entire park in under 2 hours. The final count was 312 cores. A good haul. I took the keys from the bearded man's corpse and searched their truck. Canned food, a few gallons of water, some extra ammunition for a pistol I didn't have. And something else, tucked into the glove box. A map. It was a topographical map of the county, stained with something dark and sticky. A location was circled in red ink. A building complex several miles north of our position. Next to the circle, a handwritten note. Bio-research lab. The genius, Annalise. I folded the map and put it in my pocket. A new lead. We returned to our base as the light began to fail. The blue-green glow of the fungi was brighter now, casting long, strange shadows across the yard. While Vera stood watch, I took the bag of cores to the outer perimeter of the wall. I knelt, pressing my palm to the earth. I poured the bag out onto the ground. I didn't absorb them in the grove. I used their energy directly. I became a conduit, pulling the raw power from the 300 gray stones and feeding it into the soil. I felt the ground beneath me thrum, a low vibration of awakening life. I pushed the energy outwards, into the wide, empty strip of land between our inner wall and the outer fence. Under the surface, things began to grow. Not vines. Something else. I had planted the spore pods here days ago. Now, I was giving them the fuel they needed. They were a type of puffball mushroom I had been engineering in the grove. A mutation. Their caps, when stepped on, would rupture with explosive force. A field of organic landmines. My first line of active defense. Born from the flesh of my enemies. Vera watched me from the porch. She had cleaned and reloaded her rifle again. Her eyes followed me as I stood up, brushing the dirt from my hands. In the eerie light of the fungi, her gaze was unblinking. It was not just respect I saw there anymore. It was something closer to faith. A belief that with me, survival was not a desperate hope. It was a certainty, and in this new world, certainty was the only thing worth having. I walked over to the map I had laid out on the hood of my truck. Bio-research lab. A genius named Annalise. People like her were valuable. The North Base was looking for primes. A genius in bioscience would be a prize beyond measure for any faction. Vera came and stood beside me, looking at the map. A new target? She asked. Her voice was low. A potential asset, I corrected her. I tapped the red circle on the map. We move out tomorrow. She nodded once. No questions. No hesitation. Just acceptance. The kingdom was growing, and so was its army. The heat pressed down. Day 20. The sun wasn't a yellow ball. It was a white smear in a hazy, pale sky. It baked the air, cooked the asphalt until the breeze that came through the truck's open window felt like the breath from an oven. Sweat traced a path down my spine, soaking into the fabric of my shirt. The world outside the reinforced windows looked tired, bleached of color. Dead. Vera sat beside me, motionless. Her rifle lay across her lap. Her eyes scanned the road, the derelict buildings, the shimmering heat haze rising from the pavement. She was a machine built for this. A part of the new landscape. The grove was different now. The influx of energy from the industrial park had pushed it to a new threshold. The space inside my head felt wider, the boundaries pushed back. 5 hectares. The exchange rate of time had improved. 1 day here was 50 days inside. The math was simple. More land, more time. More food, more weapons. The first crop of energy tomatoes were ripening on the vine, their skin a deep, pulsing red. A new asset, increased caloric output and rapid stamina recovery. An optimization. Our target was a sterile name on a stained map, Evergreen Bioresearch. The place Annalise, the genius, was supposedly holed up. Geniuses were tools. A biologist could refine my work, accelerate the weaponization of the grove, analyze the dead. A valuable tool. We saw one of the new ones about a mile from the lab. It stood in the middle of the street, hunched over the wreck of a sedan. It wasn't shambling. It was tense, coiled. Its head jerked up at the sound of our engine. It moved, not a walk, but a twitching, explosive scuttle. It covered 20 yards in a few seconds, its limbs moving at unnatural angles, then stopped, head cocked. A predator learning a new environment. I didn't slow down. This was a reconnaissance trip, not a purge. A new variable to be filed away. We drove past, and its head tracked us until we were out of sight. The lab was a stark, modern thing. A cube of dark glass and white concrete set back from the road, surrounded by what used to be a manicured corporate garden. It looked clean, out of place. Except for the men. 6 of them. They wore mismatched body armor, desert tan vests over jeans, Kevlar helmets. They carried AR-15s, held with a casual confidence. Professionals. They were working on the building's main entrance, a set of reinforced glass doors. One man held a portable torch, a blue-white flame hissing against the lock mechanism. Another stood a few feet back, providing cover. The others were arrayed around the entrance plaza, weapons up. I killed the engine 100 yards down the road, pulling the truck behind the shell of a burned-out bus. The sound of their torch was a low buzz, occasionally drowned out by the crackle of a radio. They were organized. They were here for the same prize I was. Mercs, Vera stated. It was not a question. Her hand was already on her rifle. Wait, I said. My hand rested on the dashboard. My eyes closed. I reached out with my mind. The root systems beneath the perfect lawn. The deep, stubborn roots of the ornamental oak trees. The thick, woody vines of the ivy that climbed the building's white concrete facade. They were all connected. A network. I was the signal. I did not need to summon anything from the grove. What was already here was enough. I watched them work. They were focused. The man with the torch made a fist, and another man approached with a pry bar. They thought the only threat was what they could see. I started with the man on the far right flank. He was standing near a large, decorative stone planter filled with red flowers and trailing ivy. Below the surface, in the dark soil, I found the roots. I fed them a sliver of my energy. They thickened, hardened. A single, dark green tendril, no thicker than a finger, slithered out from under the lip of the planter. It moved like a snake across the concrete. It touched the back of his boot. He didn't notice. The tendril wrapped around his ankle. I gave it a command. Tighten, and pull. His leg was yanked out from under him. He hit the ground hard, his helmet bouncing off the concrete with a loud crack. He shouted, a curse cut short by surprise. Before he could raise his rifle, more tendrils erupted from the planter. They were on him, wrapping around his arms, his legs, his chest, pinning him to the ground. One single vine curled up and over his face, pressing against his mouth. His panicked shout became a muffled squeal. The others turned, startled. What the hell? Thompson's down. I didn't give them time to think. The lawn, a perfect green carpet, came alive. The roots of the grass, fed by a surge of power, grew with impossible speed, weaving together, thickening into a tough, fibrous net just under the surface. The man closest to Thompson took a step and the ground beneath his feet turned into a trap. His boot snagged. He pitched forward, face first onto the concrete. The ivy on the building's wall began to move. Dozens of vines detached themselves, swaying like cobras. The mercenary leader, the one who seemed to be directing the breach, saw it. He raised his rifle, his mouth open to yell a warning. A vine whipped down from above. It was faster than a striking snake. It wrapped around his rifle, yanking it from his hands. It flew 20 feet into the air and crashed against the wall. Before he could draw his sidearm, another vine coiled around his neck. It didn't snap it, it just squeezed. His face went from pale to red to a deep, blotchy purple. His hands clawed at the vine. He made a wet, gurgling sound. His knees buckled. The vine held him up, his boots kicking feebly a few inches off the ground. Panic broke their discipline. One of them opened fire on the ivy-covered wall, his rifle spitting bullets in a wide, uncontrolled spray. The rounds chipped the concrete and shredded leaves, but the mass of vines was too thick. Another tried to run. He sprinted for the parking lot, back the way they came. He ran across a bed of rose bushes that lined the walkway. I touched the bushes with my mind. The thorns, an inch long and needle-sharp, grew. They became 3-inch-long spikes, as hard as iron. He tripped, throwing his hands out to break his fall. His right palm landed squarely on one of the bushes. He screamed, a high, thin sound of pure pain. A dark spike had pushed clear through the center of his hand, pinning it to the bush. He tried to pull it free, shrieking, tearing the flesh. The last two stood back to back near the entrance, rifles switching between the man being strangled by the ivy, the one pinned by the thorns, and the one being slowly smothered on the ground. They were terrified. They were shooting at plants. I gave my final command. The two large oak trees that flanked the entrance plaza shuddered. Their lower branches, thick as a man's thigh, bent down with an audible groaning of wood. They moved with a slow, grinding force. They weren't fighting. They were simply lowering. One branch pressed down on the mercenary who was still firing at the wall. It caught him across the shoulders, crushing him against the ground. The sound was not a snap. It was a dull, heavy crunch, like stepping on a rotten log. His rifle fire stopped. The last man stared, his face a white mask of horror inside his helmet. He dropped his rifle. He held up his hands. Stop, please. The other oak branch swung towards him. He tried to duck, but it was too wide. It didn't strike him like a club. It swept him. It caught him in the chest and legs and simply pushed him, scraping him along the concrete for 20 feet until it slammed him into the central flagpole. The pole bent with a sharp metallic shriek. The man was pinned between the tree and the steel pole, his body bent at a broken angle. He made no sound at all. Silence returned. All I could hear was the hiss of the abandoned cutting torch and the soft rustle of leaves in the hot wind. Vera lowered her rifle. She hadn't fired a shot. She looked from the carnage back to me. Her expression was unreadable. We walked forward, our boots crunching on spent shell casings. I moved from body to body. It was a harvest. Their gear was good. I collected magazines, grenades, a sidearm from the leader's hip. The man pinned to the rose bush was still alive, whimpering. Vera walked over to him. There was a single, sharp crack. Then he was quiet. I paused over the man who had been strangled. I took the radio from his vest. It was still active. A voice was crackling from it, tinny and distant. Griffin 1, what's your status? Do you copy? What was that transmission? Griffin 1, respond. I crushed it under my boot. The main doors of the lab hissed. They slid open a few inches, then stopped. A security camera above the door, a black dome, swiveled to point directly at us. Inside, behind the tinted glass, I knew she was watching. She had seen it all. A force of nature wiping out a team of trained killers. Not a rescue, an extermination. We walked to the door. The gap was wide enough to slip through. The air inside hit me first. It was cold, recycled, clean. The lobby was sterile and white, the floor polished to a mirror shine. At the far end of the lobby, behind a thick pane of bulletproof glass, was a security reception desk. A woman stood there. She wore a white lab coat over a plain gray shirt. She had dark hair pulled back in a messy bun and wore thick-rimmed glasses. Her face was pale, her knuckles white where she gripped a tablet computer. Annalise. She was staring at me. Her expression wasn't gratitude, it was a mixture of stark terror and intense, analytical curiosity. The look a scientist gives a creature she has never seen before, not knowing if it will save her or dissect her. I stopped 10 feet from the glass. Vera took up a position by the door, her rifle held low and ready. I didn't smile. I didn't offer any comfort. I stated the facts. They'll send another team, I said. My voice was flat in the quiet room. Bigger, better armed. They know you're here. They know what you are. I let that hang in the cold air. I saw her swallow. You have 2 choices, I continued, my eyes locked on hers. 1. You come with me. I'll give you a laboratory with resources you can't imagine. You will be safe. You will continue your work, for me. 2. You stay here. You wait for the next team. Maybe you'll get lucky, maybe you won't. I didn't need to say more. The proof of my power was lying dead and broken in her front garden, being slowly absorbed by the roots of her decorative plants. I had shown her the new world. Now, she had to choose her place in it. Her eyes were locked on me through the reinforced glass. The terror was a physical thing I could see in the slight tremor of her hand, the tightness of her jaw. But underneath it was something else. A current of analysis. She was not just prey looking at a predator. She was a scientist observing an anomaly. Who are you? Her voice was thin, filtered through the intercom on the desk. Your only option, I said. My voice was just noise in the cold, clean room. Vera stood by the entrance, a shadow, her rifle held in a low ready position. She was a part of the architecture now. That's not an answer, Annalise countered. She pushed her glasses up her nose. An act of defiance. An attempt to impose order on the chaos I had just unleashed on her front lawn. You control the plants. A Class S biokinetic. The mutation must be centered in your parietal lobe, but the energy expenditure, it's impossible. What's your power source? Words. Questions. She was trying to fit me into a box, label me, reduce the bodies outside to a set of manageable data points. I walked closer, stopping a foot from the thick glass that separated us. I could see my reflection superimposed over her pale face. My power source is not your concern. Your survival is. I demand proof, she said. The tremor was gone from her hand. The scientist had taken over. What you did out there, it's a demonstration. But it's not a sustainable model for survival. A fortress of ivy and angry trees? That's a target. To trust you, to go with you, I need to understand the foundation. I need to see the source. She thought she was negotiating. She thought she was in a position of power because she possessed a brain I wanted. She was wrong, but her demand aligned with my purpose. Showing her was more efficient than telling her. I motioned to Vera, a slight tilt of my head. Vera moved to the security console and with a few keystrokes, the lock on Annalise's glass cage disengaged with a solid thud. The door slid open a few inches. Annalise flinched but held her ground. I stepped into her sterile bubble. The air was even colder here. She took an involuntary step back, clutching the tablet to her chest like a shield. Proof, I said. It wasn't a question. I held out my hand. Her eyes darted from my face to my hand, then back. A long second passed. The only sound was the low hum of the building's air circulation. She was calculating the odds. Her mind was running through scenarios. Flee, fight, comply. The bodies outside provided a grim dataset for the first two options. Slowly, she reached out. Her fingers were cold as they brushed against mine. I closed my hand around hers. Her skin was soft, weak. I placed my other hand on her shoulder. Don't, she started to say. I pulled. The world did not dissolve or warp. It was simpler than that. One moment we were in a white, sterile security booth. The next, we were not. The air hit her first. I felt her gasp, a ragged intake of breath. It was warm, heavy with the scent of damp earth, blooming flowers, and something else, a clean, metallic tang like the air after a thunderstorm. The harsh fluorescent lights were gone, replaced by a soft, golden daylight that seemed to emanate from the sky itself, a sky with no sun. We stood on a path of dark, rich soil. To our left, a field of cornstalks stood 15 feet high, their ears swollen and ready for harvest. To our right, a row of tomato plants, taller than I was, were laden with fruit that glowed with a faint, pulsing red light. A few yards away, a stream of water so clear it looked like liquid glass snaked through the land, shimmering as it flowed. In the distance, the landscape stretched on, a perfect, impossible vista of green and brown under the golden sky. The hum of the lab was gone. Here, the only sounds were the rustle of leaves and the gentle murmur of the stream. Annalise made a choked sound. She ripped her hand from mine and stumbled back, her heel sinking into the soft earth. Her tablet fell from her grip, landing silently on the soil. Her eyes were wide, scanning the horizon, the plants, the sky. The analytical mind was gone, replaced by pure shock. Her mouth opened and closed. She stammered, her voice a raw whisper. This is not possible. A tesseract-like spatial fold? A stable wormhole? The energy requirements. No, it has to be a full immersion projection. A hallucination. She reached down and touched a broad, green leaf on a nearby beanstalk. She pulled her hand back as if burned. Tactile feedback is registered. Olfactory senses, confirmed. Barometric pressure difference, significant. Her scientific training was a life raft she was clinging to in an ocean of the impossible. She was trying to diagnose a miracle. It is not a hallucination, I said. I bent down, picked up a small, dry seed from the ground, and held it in my palm. It is a tool, my tool. I closed my hand. I pushed a thread of my own energy into the seed. I felt it connect with the power of this place. The land responded. I opened my hand. Annalise stared, her breath hitched in her throat. The seed had split. A tiny green shoot was already pushing its way out, a millimeter long. As she watched, it grew. It visibly lengthened, unfurling two tiny leaves. A root, thin and white, snaked down and dug into the crease of my palm. In the span of 10 seconds, the seedling was an inch tall. Her carefully constructed reality broke. No, she breathed. The violation of thermodynamics. Cellular division at this rate, it's... She couldn't find a word. Her entire vocabulary, her life's work, had failed her. I closed my hand again, cutting off the energy flow. The seedling stopped growing. This space and my abilities are connected. The plants outside were just the tip of the spear. This is the shaft. This is the source. I gestured to the vast expanse around us. One day out there is 50 days in here. Endless food, endless water, a place to experiment, to grow things the world has never seen. I let the information settle into her. The implications, the strategic value, the sheer power it represented. I was not just a man who could talk to plants. I owned a separate reality. Annalise wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the glowing red tomatoes, at the impossibly clear water of the stream. Her face was a mask of awe. The terror was gone. The intellectual arrogance was gone. In their place was a burning, ravenous hunger. The hunger for knowledge. She was a biologist who had just been led into Eden. She finally turned to me. Her eyes, magnified by her glasses, were shining with an intensity that bordered on madness. I will come with you. Her voice was firm now, filled with a new, powerful resolve. On one condition. I waited. Let me study it, she said, her voice dropping, almost reverent. Everything. The soil composition, the water's properties, the genetic mutations in these plants, the temporal distortion. I need access. I need equipment. I need to understand how this works. I gave a single, slow nod. You will have your lab. That was all she needed. The contract was sealed, not with a signature but with the collapse of one world and the revelation of another. The transition back was just as jarring. One blink and the warm, living air was gone, replaced by the sterile chill of the security office. Annalise swayed on her feet, her hand going to her head. The tablet was still lying on the rich soil 50 miles in a dimension away. The tablet, she murmured, disoriented. With a thought, it appeared in my hand. I handed it to her. The back was smudged with dark, fertile earth. The final piece of proof. She took it without a word. The next few hours were a model of efficiency. I gave the orders. Vera executed them. We did not take everything. We took the essentials. The high-powered servers containing her research data. The electron microscope. The gene sequencer. Centrifuges, spectrometers, delicate glassware packed with methodical precision. Every hard drive, every notebook, every sample case. We loaded it all onto their own transport truck, a heavy-duty vehicle I had claimed from the dead mercenaries. We left the lights on in the lab. To any outside observer, it would look like it was still occupied. A ghost ship waiting for its crew to return. They would send another team. I was counting on it. Let them waste their resources on an empty building. The drive back to the villa was made in silence. Annalise sat in the passenger seat of the transport, staring out the window, but I knew she wasn't seeing the decaying suburbs. She was seeing glowing fruit and impossible growth rates. Vera drove the lead truck. I followed. We were a small, self-contained convoy carrying the seeds of a new world order. Back at the base, I designated the entire west wing of the main villa as her new research center. The living room became a common area. The formal dining room was stripped to make way for the servers. I had Vera run a dedicated power line from the solar array and the backup generators. By nightfall, the place was humming with a low thrum of scientific equipment. Fluorescent lights bathed the room in a constant, steady glare. Annalise was a machine. She didn't ask for food, water, or rest. She moved with a frenetic energy, directing Vera and me where to place the most sensitive instruments. As soon as the gene sequencer was powered on, she was there, connecting a portable drive, her fingers flying across the keypad. She had a sample of the stream water I had brought back for her in a sealed container. It was the first thing she began to analyze. I left her to her work. Vera stood post outside the new lab's door. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes followed the scientist's every move when she was in sight. She was my guardian. She ensured new assets did not become liabilities. Later, I sat in my study, monitoring the shortwave radio. Static hissed and popped, but through the noise, I caught fragments. A clear, military-style broadcast. All priority personnel, report to designated extraction points. Safe Zone 1 is operational. We are actively searching for individuals with expertise in the following fields: bioengineering, applied physics, civil engineering. They were gathering the pieces of the old world, trying to glue them back together. They were looking for people like Annalise. They were too slow. Just before the 22nd day of this new world began, Annalise came to find me. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were electric. She held up a new tablet, lines of data scrolling across its screen. "It's done," she said, her voice raspy from disuse. "The preliminary analysis. The water from your space. It's not just H2O. It contains a unique protein chain, a biological catalyst that accelerates cellular regeneration and energy transfer on a quantum level. She shook her head, smiling faintly. "It's a miracle, from a scientific standpoint. With this, and the plant samples, we can remake the food chain. We can build a completely self-sufficient ecosystem. Fortify the base. Weaponize the flora. The potential is limitless." She paused, taking a breath. "But there's a problem. A bottleneck. Us. We have the technology, we have the source. We lack manpower. We need more hands. Skilled and unskilled." She swiped the screen. A new image appeared. A satellite map of an area 15 miles to the east. A cluster of derelict warehouses. One of them was circled in red. "And I found something else," she said, her voice dropping. "While setting up the broad-spectrum scanners, I picked up a faint energy signature. It's not radiation, it's patterned, biological, a steady, rhythmic pulse of low-level energy. According to the old grid maps, this location was a suspected human trafficking depot before the fall. The signal is coming from right inside it. She looked up at me, the clinical curiosity in her eyes now mixed with something else. A flicker of the old world's morality. Someone with an ability is there, and given the location, they're probably a prisoner. The heat was a physical weight. Day 25, the air outside the villa shimmered above the scorched asphalt, the temperature gauge on the main console reading 48 degrees Celsius. A killing heat. The world was cooking itself. Inside, conditioned air hummed, a low-frequency reminder of the power I now commanded. Annalise stood before me, flanked by two server towers that bathed her in a constant, sterile light. Her lab, once a formal dining room, was a web of cables and glowing screens. She had not changed her clothes in 2 days. The bottleneck is labor, she said. Her voice was flat, a simple statement of fact. She gestured to a schematic on her tablet. A multi-chambered greenhouse design, complete with automated irrigation systems using modified vines. I can design it, you can build it with your abilities. But we can't operate it. We can't process, plant, and harvest on this scale. Not with just the three of us. We need hands. Compliant, capable hands. I watched her, my expression unchanging. She was right. The space was a miracle, but it was best used for the impossible, mutating new strains, growing the rarest specimens. For bulk production of simple calories, potatoes, corn, wheat, we needed to use the dead earth outside, revitalized and protected. That required people. She swiped the screen. The schematic vanished, replaced by a satellite map. A red circle pulsed over a cluster of warehouses 15 miles east. The signal is still there. Biological, rhythmic, a low-level energy signature consistent with a developing kinetic or healer-type ability. The location was flagged pre-collapse as a trafficking hub. She looked up from the tablet, her eyes magnified behind her glasses. Someone with power is a prisoner in that building. A healer, most likely, given the low, steady output. It's the most valuable commodity in a world like this, next to clean water. They'll be selling them. Vera stepped into the doorway, a silent shadow. She had heard everything. Her hand rested on the stock of her rifle. Her gaze met mine. It was a question, asked without a single word. My response was just a single, decisive nod. The transport truck was an oven. Even with the AC blasting, the heat pressed in through the armored windows. The world outside was a monochrome palette of scorched brown and faded gray. I drove. Vera sat in the passenger seat, cleaning her rifle for the third time, the metallic clicks of the action a methodical, calming sound in the cab. Annalise was in the back, inside a mobile command center we had jury-rigged from her lab equipment. She was our eye in the sky, our ear to the ground. I'm tapping into the local comms, her voice crackled through the intercom. Heavy static, but I'm picking up chatter. Crude encryption. They're using old hunting radios. They're running an auction. A pause. They're calling the target, the little miracle. Confirms the healer theory. They sound confident, arrogant. I said nothing. I pressed my palm against the hot metal of the dashboard. I closed my eyes, reaching out not with my sight, but with my other sense. The one that was tied to the earth. I pushed my awareness down, through the asphalt, into the dry, packed dirt below. I felt the network of dead roots, the forgotten pipes, the sleeping seeds. I pushed further, my senses spreading like a root system through the ground. 15 miles. 10. 5. I felt it. The warehouse. A concrete slab floor. Below it, a tangle of old plumbing and dormant weeds. Inside, the vibration of dozens of heartbeats. Some fast with fear, some slow with authority, and one was a faint, warm pulse. A flickering candle in a storm. Annalise was right. We parked half a mile away, behind the husk of a burned-out gas station. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was heavy. Heat sensors show 17 signatures inside the main structure. Annalise's voice came through. 12 clumped together in the center. 5 moving freely. They're armed. Looks like pistols and a few shotguns. No military-grade hardware. Vera, I said. It was the first word I'd spoken in an hour. She was already moving. She exited the truck, her movements fluid and economical. She unslung her rifle, optics already calibrated, and moved to a high point on a pile of rubble 60 yards from the warehouse. A silent overwatch. I'm in position, her voice, a calm whisper in my earpiece. I got out of the truck. The wave of heat hit me like a physical blow. I walked towards the warehouse, my boots crunching on gravel and broken glass. I didn't need to sneak. I stopped 100 feet from a large corrugated metal door. I could hear them now. Shouting, laughter, the sound of metal hitting metal. I reached out with my mind again, connecting to the ground beneath the building. I felt the dormant life there. The tough, wiry weeds that grew in cracks. The deep, stubborn roots that had survived the acid rains. I poured my energy into them. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale sweat, and despair. A dozen people were crammed into a large wrought iron cage, their faces thin and smudged with dirt. In the center of the floor stood a man with a greasy beard and a shotgun slung over his shoulder. He grinned, revealing a row of yellow teeth. Next to him, a smaller cage held a single girl. She couldn't have been more than 17. Her hair was matted, her clothes were rags, and a deep purple bruise covered one side of her face. One of the men in the larger cage had a gash on his arm, and she was holding a hand over it through the bars. A faint, pale green light emanated from her palm, weak and flickering. She was exhausted, swaying on her feet. "See that?" the bearded man shouted to his 4 companions, who were leaning against a stack of crates, drinking from flasks. "A genuine healer. A fucking unicorn. The boys from the Iron Skulls convoy will give us a vehicle, ammunition, 10 women for this one alone." One of his men laughed. "We should try her out first." The girl flinched, pulling her hand back. The green light died. "Don't damage the merchandise," the leader grunted. He kicked the side of her cage. The clang made everyone jump. "Keep healing him. Show the product works." His foot drew back for another kick. It never landed. The concrete floor beneath him cracked. Not a shatter, but a series of thick, straight lines, as if drawn by a giant ruler. He looked down, his booze-addled brain trying to process what he was seeing. Then the floor erupted. It was not loud. It was a deep, grinding sound, like the earth itself was tearing. From the cracks, things grew. Thick, dark green vines, glistening and covered in sharp, woody thorns, shot upwards. They were not soft plants. They moved with the speed and weight of steel cables. One vine whipped around the bearded man's kicking leg, the thorns digging deep into his flesh. He screamed, a high, thin sound of shock. Before the scream could end, another vine punched straight up through the concrete, piercing his chest from below. The sound was a wet, heavy chunk. It lifted him 3 feet into the air, his shotgun clattering to the floor. His body hung there, twitching. The other 4 men stared for a fraction of a second. Their brains froze, caught between fight and flight. It was too late for either. Roots, as thick as a man's arm, burst from the floor around them. They were not slow. They moved like striking snakes. One man was ensnared, his body and limbs constricted until the sound of snapping bones echoed in the sudden quiet. Another tried to raise his pistol, but a thorny vine lashed across his face, tearing a furrow through skin and eyeball. He fell back, screaming without a voice. The last 2 were simply dragged down, pulled into the newly opened fissures in the floor as the very ground they stood on became a carnivorous pit. The entire event took less than 5 seconds. Silence. The only sound was a slow, wet drip. Blood, pooling on the cracked concrete. The vines and roots held the bodies, grotesque statues in a newly formed garden of death. From the main entrance, I walked in. The sunlight behind me cast me in silhouette. I stepped over the still warm body of the man with the ruined face and walked towards the cages. The prisoners inside were not cheering. They were pressed against the back of the cage, their eyes wide with a new kind of terror. They had just watched their captors be annihilated by a force of nature. Now that force was walking towards them. I looked at them, at their filth, their hunger, their fear. I looked at the girl in the small cage. She was staring at me, her young face a mask of shock and dread. She was afraid of me. Good. Fear was a foundation you could build on. A single, razor-sharp leaf from one of the vines snaked out and sliced through the padlock on the main cage. The door creaked open. No one moved. "The men who put you in here are dead," I said. My voice was calm, cutting through the thick air. "Your cage is open." They still didn't move. They just stared. "This is not a rescue," I continued, my tone flat and even. "I am not a savior. I am a pragmatist. Outside this building, you will die. From the heat, from the dead, or from men worse than them. I can offer you something else. A place with walls, clean water, food, protection." I paused, letting the words sink in. Hope began to flicker in some of their eyes, overriding the fear. It is not free, I said, shattering that hope before it could fully form. My place is not a charity. It is a fortress. Everyone inside contributes. Everyone has a purpose. You will work. You will follow my rules. Your lives from this moment on are an exchange. You give me your labor, your skills, your loyalty. I give you another day. That is the deal. I turned my gaze to the lone girl. You, the healer. She flinched. Come out. Slowly, shakily, she pushed her small cage door open and stepped onto the bloodstained floor. Your ability, I said. It is your value. At my base, you will use it for me and my people. In exchange, you will be safe. You will eat well. Do you understand? She stared at me, her throat working. Finally, she managed a tiny, almost inaudible nod. Her name was Mia. I didn't know it yet, but it didn't matter. I knew her function. I turned back to the others. I need engineers, mechanics, electricians, doctors, soldiers. Anyone with a useful skill. The rest of you will do manual labor. Building, farming, cleaning. No one is useless. Now, form a line. State your name and your trade before the collapse. Slowly, like animals coaxed out of hiding, they began to emerge from the cage, their eyes shifting between me and the horrifying plant sculptures that had once been their captors. The first man to step forward, a lanky man with glasses, cleared his throat. I was a plumber, he stammered. I gave a slight nod. Useful. The recruitment had begun. The convoy truck was an oven. The one I brought them back in. I parked it in the center of the secondary warehouse, a large, dusty structure of corrugated steel and concrete that stood 100 yards outside the main villa's perimeter wall. Day 28. The heat did not relent. Dust motes danced in the thick yellow shafts of light cutting through gaps in the metal siding. The 12 of them huddled near the back of the truck's cargo bay. The plumber, the electrician, a woman who claimed to be a nurse, and 9 others whose past lives were a mix of retail, food service, and unemployment. Useless, mostly. Their faces were smeared with dirt and dried sweat. Their eyes followed my every move. They had been here for 3 days. 3 days of measured rations of water and dry crackers. Just enough to keep them alive. Just enough to make them understand their new reality. I did not allow them inside my home. I did not allow them near the core of my operation. They were acquisitions, untested assets, liabilities until proven otherwise. Only the girl, Mia, had been taken directly to the villa. Annika's initial report was concise. Subject malnourished, dehydrated, bruised. No diseases. Her healing ability was genuine but weak, like a sputtering flame. Annika was attending to her. I walked to the front of the warehouse. Vera stood by the main door, a rifle held casually across her chest. She watched the group with the detached patience of a wolf watching sheep. She was my wall, my enforcer, the human face of the consequences I preferred to deliver from a distance. Time, I said. She nodded once, then slid open a smaller door set into the main roll-up gate. 2 of my men, recruited from a small survivor group I had absorbed weeks ago, wheeled in a large metal cart. The sound of its squeaking wheels was loud in the cavernous space. On the cart was a single stainless steel pot and a large, clear water dispenser. The pot was filled to the brim with steaming, white rice. The smell hit the group like a physical blow. I saw jaws working, throats swallowing nothing. I saw the hunger sharpen their features. The dispenser held 20 gallons of clean, clear water, condensation beating on its sides. It was more wealth than they had seen in a month. I stepped in front of the cart. I let them look. I let them want. Today, we determine your future, I said. My voice echoed slightly. I need skilled labor. I am a reasonable man. A skill is worth more than a strong back. Better work earns better rewards. I gestured to the cart. This is not a meal for everyone. This is an interview. I looked at the lanky man with glasses. The plumber stepped forward. He flinched, then shuffled out of the group, his eyes darting between me and the rice. What is the standard pipe diameter for a residential main waterline in a post-2000 construction? The question came not from me, but from a small speaker I wore on my collar. Annika's voice, crisp and clinical. The plumber blinked. 3/4 inch? Or 1 inch, maybe? What is the proper method for sweating a copper pipe joint? Annika's voice again. Heat it. With a torch. Add the solder. He was sweating, and not from the heat. Correct, Annika said. I nodded. You eat, I said, pointing to the cart. The plumber stared, then scrambled forward. One of my men handed him a metal bowl. He filled it with rice, his hands shaking so much half of it spilled. He didn't care. He took the bowl and retreated to a corner, shoveling the food into his mouth with his bare hands. Next was the electrician, a hard-faced man in his 40s. Annika's questions were just as pointed. He answered them without hesitation. He earned his bowl. Then the nurse. She described how to triage a compound fracture and how to spot the signs of sepsis. She earned her bowl. One by one, they were vetted. 3 passed. The rest watched, their hope turning to a sick, desperate thing. Anyone else? I asked. Any other skills hidden in this group? A thick-necked man with a shaved head stepped forward. He had been quiet until now, watching. I was a structural engineer, he said, his voice a low rumble. I looked at him. His hands were soft. No calluses. What is the typical PSI rating for reinforced concrete used in commercial foundations? Annika's voice was sharp. The man's eyes flickered for a second. Around 3,000 PSI. What is the function of a shear wall? To resist lateral forces. Wind, earthquakes. He sounded plausible, too plausible. A few more questions followed. The man answered them, his confidence growing. 2 other men stepped forward, emboldened. One claimed to be a mechanic, the other a chemist. I let them finish their claims. The 3 of them stood there, chests puffed out, looking at the rice with entitlement. I raised a hand, palm open. From the dirt floor beside them, 3 vines shot out. They were not the massive, building-wrecking growths from the trafficker's warehouse. These were smaller, faster. Binders, covered in hooked thorns that were designed to hold, not kill. Each vine looped around the man's ankle. A sharp tug. All 3 fell hard onto the concrete. The sound of their bodies hitting the floor was a wet slap. The man who claimed to be a mechanic screamed as thorns bit into his skin. What the hell? The structural engineer, Annika's voice came through the speaker, ice cold. He used textbook answers a first-year student would memorize. He has no practical knowledge of material stress or load-bearing calculations. He's a liar. The man's face went white. The mechanic doesn't know the difference between a torque wrench and a socket wrench. He called a carburetor a fuel mixer. He's a liar. The chemist, Annika's voice was laced with something that sounded like contempt. Thought lithium and sodium were inert in water. He's not just a liar. He's a moron who would have blown up my lab. The other survivors recoiled. They scrambled back, pressing themselves against the metal wall of the truck. I walked towards the 3 men on the floor. They tried to crawl away, but the vines held them fast. My base has a simple rule, I said, my voice low. Everyone contributes. Lying about your value is a form of theft. It is an attempt to take resources from those who have earned them. I looked over at Vera. I didn't need to speak. She understood. She walked to the small door and slid it open. The blast of heat from outside was visible, a shimmer in the air. Beyond the doorway lay a cracked, sun-baked expanse of asphalt and dead weeds. In my world, I said, my gaze fixed on the 3 liars, we do not waste resources on trash. The vines tightened. They didn't crush. They dragged. The men screamed, clawing at the concrete floor. Their fingernails scraped and broke. The thorns on the vines tore long, shallow furrows in their skin, leaving bloody trails on the dusty ground. They were dragged across the 100 yards of the warehouse floor, through the open door, and thrown out into the punishing sun. Vera slammed the door shut. The screams were cut off. Silence returned to the warehouse. The only sound was the frantic, harsh breathing of the remaining 9 people. And the soft chewing of the plumber, who had frozen mid-bite, rice stuck to his chin. I turned to the rest of them. Their faces were masks of pure terror. Good. Fear is the most effective form of communication. The rest of you, I said, my voice even. Your job is manual labor. You will build, you will dig, you will move things. For that, you will receive a daily ration. Work hard, you get a full ration. Be lazy, you get half. Refuse to work. I let the sentence hang in the air. I didn't need to finish it. They understood. One of my guards handed out smaller bowls and smaller portions of rice and a single cup of water to each of the 9 laborers. They took it with trembling hands, their eyes downcast. They ate quickly, silently, as if afraid the food would be taken away. They had just seen hell, and now they were being given a small piece of heaven. They knew the price. Later that evening, Annika's voice came over my personal comm. I was in my study, looking over schematics for the greenhouse. Subject Mia has stabilized. Vitals are strong. She consumed a full meal. Her healing output has increased by approximately 200% after one dose of the spring water. She is asking about the others. Tell her they are being cared for, I said. It was not a lie. Tell her their well-being is tied to her cooperation. A pause on the other end. Understood, Annika said. Also, I've compiled the initial reports from the laborers. We can begin construction of the outer barracks tomorrow. Vera will supervise. Good. One more thing, Liam, she said. The liars you ejected, they won't die from the heat, not right away. They'll wander. They'll talk. News of a man who commands plants and has a surplus of food and water will spread. Let it spread, I said. There is a gathering place, she continued, about 10 miles east. At a major highway crossroads. A black market, people call it the crossroads. They trade everything there, bullets, fuel, information, people. A rumor like that will fetch a high price. I looked out the armored window of my study. Past my walls, past the perimeter guarded by Vera and the plant-based defenses, the world was a dying ruin. A ruin filled with scavengers. It was time they knew a new predator was in their midst. One with things to sell. One who set his own prices. Annika, I said, prepare a trade manifest, a small one, a sample, a few perfect apples, a kilogram of clean rice, 10 gallons of pure water. A demonstration? She asked. An advertisement, I corrected. I'll go to this crossroads myself. The heat was a physical weight. It pressed down from a bleached white sky, radiated up from the cracked asphalt, and baked the air inside the truck cab into a tangible thing you had to push through to breathe. Day 30. The world was an oven. I parked the truck half a mile out, concealed in the skeletal remains of a strip mall. Vera got out from the passenger side. She moved with a fluid economy that wasted no motion. We were both dressed for business, not for the weather. Loose BDU pants, scuffed combat boots, long-sleeved tactical shirts to protect from the sun and hide our frames. Shamags were pulled up over our noses and mouths, and dark glasses covered our eyes. We were anonymous shapes, blending in with 100 other desperate figures trudging toward the crossroads. The sound reached us first. A low, constant hum, like a nest of disturbed hornets. The smell came next, a cocktail of unwashed bodies, human waste, dust, and something sweet and rotten that I didn't want to identify. This was the crossroads, the premier open-air market for the city's dregs. My boots crunched over gravel and shattered glass. The entrance was just a wider gap between two overturned buses. No guards. The threat of mutual destruction was the only law here. We stepped through, and the hum resolved into individual sounds. A man coughing, a wet, ragged noise. The sharp crack of an argument over a can of beans. The thin wail of a child. It was a city of scrap. Tarps stretched between burned-out cars. Sheets of corrugated metal formed leaning walls. People sat in the slivers of shade, their faces passive and gaunt. Their eyes tracked us as we walked, noting our clean gear, our confident stride. They were calculating, weighing risk versus reward. I saw the currency of this new world laid out on stained blankets. A pile of 9mm cartridges next to a single, cloudy bottle of iodine. 3 mold-spotted potatoes offered for a rusty hatchet. A young woman with vacant eyes sat tied to a pole, a wooden sign around her neck that just said, work. Her owner, a man with a festering sore on his cheek, watched us pass, his hand resting on the hilt of a machete. Vera's head turned a fraction of an inch in his direction. Her hand never strayed more than a foot from the pistol on her hip. We ignored them. We were not here for trinkets or flesh. We walked toward the center of the sprawl, where the bartering was loudest, where the self-appointed kings of this dump held court. The heart of the crossroads was a cluster of shipping containers arranged in a rough square. A heavy man with a perspiring, shaved head sat on a throne made from stacked tires, flanked by 2 men holding shotguns. He was laughing, a piece of discolored jerky dangling from his lips. Several other men, better fed and better armed than the general populace, lounged nearby, their laughter joining his. This was my stage. I walked directly into the center of their circle. The laughter died, the men tensed, hands moving to weapons. Vera stopped 10 feet behind me, a silent statue facing the crowd, her presence a clear, do not cross line. I didn't speak. I looked at the filthy, splintered crate that served as a table. With one hand, I swept aside a collection of greasy rags and spent shell casings. The noise was loud in the sudden quiet. I unzipped a pouch on my thigh rig. I reached inside. Slowly, I placed the apple on the crate. It was not a thing that belonged in this world. The hush that had fallen over the small group of thugs now spread like a shockwave through the entire market. The coughing stopped, the bartering ceased, the baby's cry was stifled. 1,000 pairs of eyes fixed on the small, round object on the crate. It was perfect. The skin was a deep, glossy red, without a single blemish or bruise. It was cool, a faint mist of condensation beating on its surface from the temperature difference between my pack and the searing air. A single, vibrant green leaf was still attached to a perfect stem. The heavy man on the tire throne stared at it. His mouth hung open, the piece of jerky forgotten. I saw his tongue dart out to wet his lips. I saw the raw, animal hunger in his eyes, a desire so potent it was almost a physical force. It wasn't just for food. It was for a memory. For a world that was gone. He swallowed. The sound was audible. What do you want? His voice was rough, strained. My best rifle? Ammo? Anything. I looked at him, then let my gaze sweep over the other stunned faces. I saw the same look everywhere. Awe, greed, a desperate, burning need. I finally spoke. My voice was low, filtered through the shamog, but it carried in the stillness. I'm not trading. A flicker of confusion crossed their faces. I'm buying, I said. I pointed a single finger at the apple. This is a down payment. A sample. I want information. The crowd stirred, a low murmur rippling through them. I want to know about every major group operating in this city, I stated, my voice flat. Military remnants, fortified compounds, corporate security squads, warlords who think they're kings. I paused. I want to know about the evolved. Names, locations, abilities. The strong ones. I looked back at the man on the throne. The best information gets a reward. Something better than this. It was like throwing a match into a puddle of gasoline. The silence shattered. The crowd surged forward, a wave of desperate bodies stopped only by the invisible wall of Vera's posture. Voices erupted, shouting over each other. The 5th Street Militia. They have a tank. I saw it. The old pharma building. Gen Tech. They got walls, snipers. There's a woman. They call her Banshee. She screams and your head it just bursts. She's with the refinery crew. The military are holed up at the National Guard Armory. They shoot anyone who gets close. The man on the throne, his authority completely evaporated, was on his feet, shouting for order that wouldn't come. His men looked nervously between him and the tide of people. They were no longer guards. They were just 3 men against 100 who had just been shown a glimpse of paradise. I ignored the chaos. I listened. My mind, supported by Annika's cold logic filtering through a hidden earpiece, sorted the frantic shouts. She was recording everything, cross-referencing, discarding the obvious lies, flagging the repeated claims. A mental map began to form. The Gen Tech building, the armory, a group called the Vultures at the city dump, the refinery crew, names, locations, the first threads of a web. In a corner of the market, hidden in the deep shadow of a container, a figure that had been watching the entire exchange shifted. Anne, though I did not know her name then, noted the man in the tactical gear. She noted his calm, she noted the flawless bodyguard, and most of all, she noted the apple. It was not a show of wealth. It was a show of impossible power. A power that defied the new rules of the world. She committed his shape to memory. Back at the villa, Annika's voice was a calm presence in my ear, cutting through the noise. Subject Mia is asking about the new arrivals. She is exhibiting anxiety. Tell her the men are working hard, I murmured, my voice lost in the din. Their food and safety depend on her continued cooperation. Understood, Annika replied. The data points are correlating. We have 3 high-probability locations for organized resistance. The armory is confirmed. The Gen Tech facility appears to be a research-focused enclave. The refinery crew is an unknown variable, but the Banshee moniker has appeared in 3 separate reports. High threat potential. The crowd was still a frantic mess. A few scuffles had broken out as people tried to push closer to me, to be the one to give the golden piece of information. Vera had shifted her weight, a subtle movement that made the nearest men stumble back. Then, a new voice cut through the noise. It wasn't loud, but it had a quality of tempered steel that sliced through the desperate babble. That's enough. The crowd parted. A woman walked through the gap they created. She was the antithesis of this place. While everyone else was layered in grime, her face was clean. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, practical ponytail. She wore a fitted black leather jacket despite the heat, and her movements were precise, confident. She wasn't a scavenger. She was a predator who had found a well-stocked hunting ground. A pair of matched pistols were holstered on her thighs. Her eyes, a sharp, intelligent gray, met mine. They held no hunger, only cold assessment. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze flickering from me to Vera, and finally to the perfect apple still sitting on the crate, an object of worship amidst the filth. A small, dangerous smile touched her lips. I'm the one who keeps the peace here. Call me Raven. She gestured vaguely at the chaotic market. You've made quite an impression. She looked directly at me. My associates and I are always interested in new suppliers, especially ones who can produce miracles. Her eyes locked onto mine. Perhaps you and I should have a conversation, somewhere more private.